And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. We have some very, very interesting guests tonight. First guest for the first hour is, you can give the man a call if you want. First guest for the first hour is probably the leading free speech lawyer in the last 40 years in America. So it's like pretty heavy stuff, right? So, but he's going to be here. He's got a new book out. We're going to talk about free speech, about whistleblowers, about leaks, about libel, about all kinds of speech, but basically about the First Amendment. And this guy knows more about it from a legal point of view than probably anybody else. Guest during the second hour is a man who wrote a really good kind of what you would call a legal thriller, only it's about a real history about what happened in West Virginia with the head of Massey Energy and the miners who got killed. And it's a really interesting story. And at 7 p.m., we're going to talk to somebody from a place called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which keeps track of, also lawyers, who keep track of incursions on the First Amendment and invasion of privacy, but from a modern sort of digital electronic perspective. It's called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This gentleman will be on the 7 o'clock news. And right now, we have with us Mr. Floyd Abrams. Hi.
Hi.
Now, the new book out is called Friend of the Court, on the Front Lines with the First Amendment. And let me just tell the listeners a little bit about you and about the book, and then we can talk. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, and people who listen to me know I would never do this unless I meant it. If you're interested in the First Amendment, especially legal defenses or discussions of the First Amendment, which affect all of us, the entire pillar of democracy, it is absolutely imperative that you get this book. It's a terrific book. It's basically a collection of Mr. Abrams. He edits them and he has some presentations in each chapter, but a collection of discussions of cases, debates he's had with other people, presentations at law schools and various other places. And it's extraordinary because he's been in the forefront of First Amendment legal battles, you might say, in scholarship for a long, long time. It's called Friend of the Court, on the Front Lines with the First Amendment, and you couldn't do better than read this book. It's fascinating. So, Mr. Abrams is a senior partner in the law firm of Cahill, Gordon, and is it Rindell?
Yes, Rindell.
Okay, and has for some 40 years litigated high-profile First Amendment and other cases. He's taught law at Columbia School of Journalism, Yale Law School, Columbia Law School, and is the author, the previous book is Speaking Freely, Trials of the First Amendment. So this book, obviously you went through everything, and you selected things that you felt were most representative of different kinds of speech and cases you were involved in, right?
Absolutely. I tried to limit it to issues that were still alive, and that were likely to recur. So, the idea of this was not so much to be any sort of historical overview, but sort of where are we now in a variety of areas based on, what sort of cases had come up so far. So one of the close calls I had was whether to put in a chapter on confidential sources of journalists. I thought of not doing it because there hadn't been any big cases in the last 4 or 5 years. And I did it, and my heavens, the whole world is falling in and out.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
On that sort of issue now.
Yeah, well, you did. You do have a good, solid discussion and comparison of WikiLeaks to other cases and other. But obviously the NSA thing just popped up like something out of a box.
Sure.
So there's different kinds of speech. Now tonight we're probably not going to cover. We don't, obviously have a limited amount of time. So there's talk in there about libel and other types of speech. But basically, I'm more interested in, and maybe most of the book is about political speech, the protection of political speech and free speech in general. But it seems to me the book emphasizes political speech, right?
Yes, I'd say political speech and the sort of competing social interests. What is it that people say or the government says when they say, well, even if it's political speech, there's something more important. So therefore, this speech shouldn't be allowed, or that speech you ought to go to jail for saying. And a central element of it is national security,
right,
which is what we've all been talking about for the last few weeks.
Hey, one of the inelegant phrases you read in the paper all the time now, what you hear from the government, and when people debate this, is the cost benefit of it.
Yeah.
I hate that phrase, but that's sort of what we're talking about here is a balancing act, right?
That's right. That's right. Because, look, everyone agrees that if publishing something is what going to lead to an enemy learning some terrible secret which they can defeat us on, or even off the battleground, at least it shouldn't be published, and in a lot of circumstances it'd be a crime to publish it. But the reality, the happy reality, is that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are genuine secrets, but the day by day, month by month, year by year reality is that it is very, very rare where publication of something really, really does some sort of real harm to national security.
Well, there's a long discussion in the book because you were very much involved with the Pentagon Papers and the New York Times. You defended the Times. And there's a long discussion, and you put all this information in about how various generals and other people concerned, after the fact, for several years, took a good look and said there was nothing in there that resulted in any particular harm.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was most telling was that even though we won that case, top secret documents about how we got in the war in Vietnam, prepared during the war in Vietnam, but even though we won it, we lost on one effort we made to persuade the court. That is, a majority of members of the court did think bad things were going to happen, that the dangers were not only real, but that there would be some sort of real harm to national security. And so far as anyone can tell, there was nothing. I went around, as you see in the book, I went around and interviewed everybody 10 years after the Pentagon Papers were published, asked, did anything bad happen with anyone, anything? And the answer was no.
I think sometimes, recently Time Magazine, I don't read Time Magazine, but I read about an article in Time Magazine. Somebody described it, so it's already secondhand. But they said that a recent cover, or the most recent cover, equated a whole modern generation of hackers and as people who really had a kind of a chip on their shoulder and were trying, just for perhaps reasons that weren't very noble, to get back at the government or expose things. In other words, they're acting in a kind of criminal way, like a joyride. This is what Time Magazine was saying recently. They're equating all these people.
Yeah.
I
wouldn't. I wouldn't put it that way. I think it is true that there is a sense of some hackers that, as they put it, information wants to be free. That everything, or just about everything, ought to be public.
So to the extent Mr. Assange has a philosophy,
right,
it might be that, right? There should be no secrets.
Yes, I think it is. And that was one of the bases for, a good deal of criticism, including my own, of him, that he wasn't engaged in a sort of editing process, a pruning process. He wasn't making decisions right or wrong as to whether, I ought to release this document or that document. He was sort of just letting it all hang out. And when you're talking about classified documents, he released 250,000 cables from U.S. ambassadors around the world to Washington. Some of them had names of confidential sources. Some of them revealed people who were saying bad things about their own government.
For perhaps good purposes, right?
Yeah. And people to whom our government, our people, had promised that, their names wouldn't get out. So, my reaction was that sort of thing was not, was not a good idea to release.
In the book, you make a really, persuasive and serious distinction between, as far as you're concerned, what happened with the Pentagon Papers, with which you were intimately familiar, and this case. In other words, it's a scattershot release of all kinds of things without consideration, whereas, as I learned in your book, Mr. Ellsberg went to great trouble, and so did the reporters from the New York Times, who spent months on this, reading through every word of it to decide what was appropriate and what would...
And the both elements of that are interesting. On the one hand, Ellsberg, who turned over, basically almost the whole secret study of how we got into the war to the Times, didn't turn over to them 3 volumes which dealt with efforts at negotiating an end to the war in Vietnam, because he hoped that the war could still end. Mm-hmm. And he thought that releasing it could make it harder. And on the other, the Times spent 3 months, as you say, holed up in a hotel, talking to experts, showing one document after another to people that used to be in the Defense Department, used to be in the CIA, used to be in the State Department, to really address the question, would there be any real national harm if we publish this or that?
Well, right now we're in the midst of, so we can't look back on or review, obviously, since we're in the midst of Mr. Snowden's, revelations. So far as whatever I can tell, and I've looked at almost everything, including the actual order, or rather the whatever it was, the warrant signed by the FISA judge, Mr. Vinson. Yeah. I've read all this stuff, and I've read, I don't know, maybe hundreds of pages of this stuff now, including everything that's been released so far. So far, I don't see anything, but I was speaking to somebody who works at the Brennan Center the other day, right? And she said she didn't want to comment on it at all because we're still at the beginning of this whole, we don't even know what else Mr. Snowden has, right?
No, that's true, and we have every reason to think that he's going to release more information, and so we certainly can't pass a final sort of judgment by any means. I think we can say that the revelations about the degree to which the NSA has telephone records of Americans, innocent, unsuspected of any crime, uninvolved in anything untoward at all. The notion that the NSA has access to and has put, as it were, in one place that information is disturbing, and is, when you think about the notion of personal privacy, that from that perspective, it is really a matter of concern that the government has that much information about all of us.
Use quote Justice Brandeis in here frequently. When the people have to make decisions, judges have to make decisions. I mean, you're arguing on one side of a case, somebody's arguing on the other, but a judge has to make a decision, and you've been in front of the Supreme Court or submitted briefs to the Supreme Court as well, right?
Yeah, often. Yeah.
Right. And, actually, I know Mel Wolf. He represented, so I have a personal stake in this because for a long time, 25 years, I was associated with WBAI in Pacifica.
Right.
And I was always fascinated by the dissent of Justice Brennan, in the Pacifica case, So this touched me in kind of a personal way. It's something I'm always interested in. Also, as a broadcaster, I'm interested in free speech. And you mentioned some of the descriptions, but Brandeis you quote frequently, and he uses this phrase "serious evil." Maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Well, Justice Brandeis was one of really the first judges. The other major one, of course, is Oliver Wendell Holmes, who really sort of put meat on the First Amendment. It's easy enough to say that freedom of speech and freedom of the press is protected, but most of the countries in the world say it and don't mean a word of it. So how do we get there? Well, we get there by having judges write opinions which make it difficult, very difficult, to overcome the protections of the First Amendment. And so Justice Brandeis has wrote a number of opinions saying that before we're even in an area in which speech can be limited or speech punished, it's got to be in an area where there is some serious evil that will result, from publication, that it will result because of the publication, and basically that there's no other way to deal with the problem other than to limit in some way or other the speech. And if you put it that way, then most of the cases sort of go away, or in most of the cases the speech team wins because the government can very rarely show, because it is very, very rarely true, that the publication of this or that, the showing of this or that, will really have some sort of terrible impact on our society.
Now, isn't that what the court what the prosecution is trying to prove in Bradley Manning's case? I mean, he pled guilty to some charges. The one that's left over is aiding the enemy. They have to prove that what he revealed did that.
I think the issue which is most central now, I mean, the answer is yes, but I think that the issue that's most central there is his state of mind. Why did he do it? Did he do it knowing or understanding in some way that it would aid the enemy, in this case defined as Al-Qaeda?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it just as he has said, and presumably, I assume he will testify about this, although you never know. Most defendants are well advised not to, but certainly his position is, I didn't do it for the purpose, any sort of purpose of hurting the U.S. It was my view this information ought to be out and understood by the American public. I mean, if the court believed that, then then he might get off.
So the distinction would be, I mean, even then, for instance, if in fact something he released did actually aid the enemy, but he didn't intend it to, then he's innocent.
Then he might be innocent of this crime. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, this is a very serious crime. I mean, what he's pled guilty to, as you said, all by itself could lead to a 20-year sentence, and that's basically misusing classified information. He had access to the information, and he used it in a way he wasn't allowed to use it,
like Mr. Ellsberg did.
Well, yes, that can be a crime, but this crime, the crime he's now being tried for, has a potential death sentence. The government's not seeking death, but it could have, and it certainly can seek life. And in that sort of case, the state of mind that you have, why you did it, is very, very important. And that's why, as I said earlier, even though most defendants are well advised not to testify in a situation where the critical issue is, why did you? We know what he did now. The question is, how come? So that's why it seems to me he might actually take the stand. So
you also write a lot in this book, and you make a big distinction between what people do and the responsibility. In other words, the press freedom and the responsibility. Use that word often in here. The press, you say, has a responsibility with the freedom. It's not the first time anybody's ever said in literature or law that with freedom comes responsibility, but you make a big point in the book about that.
Yeah, and my point is that responsibility is not one which the law imposes. I mean, I may think something is irresponsible for the press to publish, and I use my First Amendment right to criticize them for acting irresponsibly. That's been my view of WikiLeaks on a number of occasions, that they behaved in sort of a reckless way in what they released. But responsibility is sort of, in the eye of the beholder. And that's different than what the criminal law takes into account.
Right.
And it seems to me that people sometimes blur the two. They think if it's legal, it's got to be okay. If it's illegal, it's got to be bad, and neither is necessarily true.
The inevitably, of course, and you spend a lot of time in this book, especially in the introduction. You lead right off with it because people are going to start mentioning this when they read the book or thinking about it, which is Citizens United.
Yeah.
And then you spend some good amount of time in the book talking about this. To make it clear, let me just read something that was, I think I got this maybe from, who knows, and I'm saying this is from Wikipedia, so it's not any proven, or someplace I found this. Some of the cases you've done, or you've been involved in, Pentagon Papers, Landmark Communications versus Virginia, et cetera, and then you defended the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and I know about this because I live in New York, from Rudolph Giuliani, who was mayor then, over an exhibition that Giuliani decided was offensive and repulsive, and every other word he could come up with had to do with the Catholic religion. And so you did that, and let's see, Al Franken from a trademark lawsuit brought by Fox News Channel over the use of the phrase fair and balanced. I'll move on.
That was hilarious one.
Yes, it is. That's a good one. That was good for laughs. Now, here, of course, we have here, let's see, two things. He is, Mr. Abrams, I don't know from when, I just printed this out. He's currently representing 5 tobacco companies, including R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company and Lorillard Tobacco, in their lawsuit against Food and Drug Administration over graphic warning labels on cigarette packs, contending that requiring graphic warning labels on a lawful product cannot withstand constitutional scrutiny. So you're doing that, and also you were involved in the defense of Citizens United in their case, right?
That's right. I'm not always a liberal hero.
You knew I was going to bring this up, right?
Of course. No, of course.
Okay, that's why you wrote this stuff in the book. You had to, All right, so...
I did represent Lorillard, not the 5 tobacco companies, but I did represent Lorillard in that case, and it was my view, and we did win the case. Basically not on the issue of whether warnings can be required, which they can on cigarettes, but whether the government could force cigarette company, it is a lawful product, to put sort of grotesque pictures. Which would take up half the cigarette pack, of dead people, of cadavers and the like. And the argument we made basically was, the government can engage in that speech, but they can't make a company that makes a lawful product sort of scream out, "Don't buy this product."
But that was the intent of the government in doing that, right?
Yes.
And it is. In a certain way, it's a kind of a poisonous product, right?
It's a dangerous product, sure.
Yeah. They put labels with the skull and crossbones on things sometimes, right?
Yes, in other areas, but look, cigarette packs have warnings on them.
That's enough.
Which deal with causation. The potential harmful effects of smoking.
Right.
And that's allowed. And it wasn't at issue. It wasn't challenged, and seriously, it could not be challenged.
So I guess your argument was the severity and the extent to which they went was too far.
That at some point, it becomes a sort of primal scream, and that the point we were making is the government can't make the manufacturer say that about its own product. That they can require facts. And they can require a sort of, dispassionate articulation of the dangers. But once they get into sort of deeply emotional, sort of, as I said, sort of scream-like language and pictures, they got to do that themselves. As for Citizens United...
Yes. So, one thing you wrote, just as a preamble to this, that you wrote in the book that you were surprised, if not actually shocked, by some of your friends and other legal scholars' reaction. In fact, I saw a debate. I read in the book, of course, a debate between you and someone named Bert Newborn, a famous lawyer and legal scholar, and he was outraged and said so. And you seemed surprised and shocked by people's responses to your defense of Citizens United. Why were you surprised or shocked?
Well, put it this way. Think of what we protect, what speech we protect. We protect Nazi speech. We protect pornography. We protect all sorts of speech simply on the ground that we don't let the government decide content of, who can say what, even if we know it's bad. Here you have political speech. I started thinking about Citizens United in particular by thinking about the organization called Citizens United and the speech they wanted to utter. They made a documentary blasting then Senator Hillary Clinton, basically sort of screaming out that she shouldn't be elected president. This was back in 2008 when she was the leading Democratic candidate for a time. And under the statute in effect then, you couldn't put that documentary on television.
It was during a certain time period. It was a certain time period, too.
Yeah, within 60 days of an election.
Okay.
And 30 days of a convention. At the time when it matters most, because some of the money that the company, that the conservative group had was corporate money.
But the statute also includes unions, right?
I'm sorry, yes, it also includes unions.
Okay.
But my reaction was, you're talking about speech, about who's going to become president of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and you're telling me that can be criminalized because the speaker is a corporation. And my own experience is that I spent most of my life representing corporations that publish newspapers and broadcasters and the like.
Mm-hmm.
No one there was saying, "My God, it's a corporation." What it seems to me that the fact that it's a corporation doesn't change the dynamics of the situation. The First Amendment, in the end, protects speech, not speakers. So it's not that corporations are people.
Mm-hmm.
It's that when corporations or unions engage in speech, and particularly political speech, my view is that we have to let them do it.
So, why do you think then? I mean, what is your interpretation of why some colleagues or longtime friends or other people were so angry at you?
Well, for one thing, there are people who believe and deeply believe that maybe the single greatest threat to American democracy is that too few people with too much money have too much power about who serves in public office.
I would like to just mention that I'm one of them,
and
for
that
sure.
is not, and so am I.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an irrational view. The question is whether you can deal with that by dealing with their speech, as opposed to
mm-hmm.
trying to persuade the public, ultimately the Congress, that you have to take steps relating to the economy, relating to the money. I mean, if you want to increase taxes on the wealthy,
mm-hmm.
or if you want to have a more egalitarian society by increasing the enforcement of, or maybe changing the terms of antitrust laws, if you want to have corporations limited in size,
mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of things a society can do which may or may not be good ideas, but have no First Amendment implications. I mean, we don't even need to have corporations.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution doesn't say we need corporations.
But obviously,
my view is that what you can't do
mm-hmm.
is to go after this by dealing with speech.
So basically, you're saying that if people want that not to be the case, they should act in any way that's available for them to act. For instance, I mean, free speech was Martin Luther King and the marchers in Selma who were deliberately breaking the law. That was an example was that an example of political speech?
Oh, yes, I would say so. I mean, there's an argument it wasn't speech, but no, I think that certainly the way it was viewed and properly viewed, it is an example of freedom of expression.
So the citizens of the United States have a right to express themselves, I would say certainly nonviolently, with civil disobedience.
And to express themselves. Well, you don't even have to get to that. I mean,
mm-hmm.
it's not illegal to, when you're talking about civil disobedience, you're talking about areas where people are acting illegally for some great moral reason
mm-hmm.
or impetus. I mean, people want to picket or demonstrate or urge Congress to pass laws. I mean, there's nothing stopping them now.
Well,
I'm not.
Yes,
no,
and,
I'm
yes and no.
When I say that, there's nothing stopping them from saying it and from trying to persuade people.
Right.
Now, I agree. It's not at all likely, but I have to say one of the major reasons it's not at all likely is I don't think the public as a whole is on board for that proposition.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, the bind people are in these days is that the very people who they might be counting on or trying to persuade to change the laws so there's more of an equal balance in America politically are the very people who are being, what's a good word that's not too inflammatory, which I do all the time, but I'm trying to be polite tonight, are the very people who are being supported actively by people with a lot of money, whereas most people don't have hardly any money. If you're going to go to the people who are almost in a way sort of subdivisions of these corporations to get them to pass laws against them, good luck, But still, you're saying, so would you consider yourself a free speech absolutist or close to it?
Well, I guess pretty close. I'm not an absolute. Look, I believe in having libel law. I believe in the principle that national security matters. I believe that there's a place for privacy law. Indeed, one of the reasons I'm troubled by the NSA is because of the privacy component. But what I mean by that is that we can have these laws, but we basically have to lean strongly in the direction of freedom of expression. Mm-hmm. I mean, the problem, as I see it, is that there are always arguments and always interests which combat that of free speech. Free speech frequently hurts reputation, hurts the way the country views itself. When you look around the world and you see the different bases upon which most countries limit speech. Mm-hmm. I mean, in Ecuador, we read today they passed legislation supposedly in the interest of better journalism.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah,
but basically, to put the government in charge. I mean.
Well, here's an article.
That's
also
the country to whom Julian Assange is turning.
Well, there's an article today in the paper from Vietnam. A government critic is arrested. A well-known blogger, apparently looked like a responsible person. He's 61 years old, so-and-so. They took advantage of the internet to criticize the government, which is basically a dictatorial government of Vietnam. It's a one-party dictatorial government. But I love this phrase here. This man, the blogger, Mr. Dow, was arrested Thursday and charged with abusing democratic freedoms.
Yeah.
He's abusing democratic freedoms by criticizing the government.
That's right. And of course, if you have to say what the First Amendment is most about, and I don't think I disagree with people who disagree with me on Citizens United about this. What it's most about is allowing criticism of government. That mm-hmm. If you have to take the sort of paradigmatic example of why we have a First Amendment, why we need a First Amendment, even though it's been expanded far beyond that, the absolute core is the ability to criticize the government.
Mm-hmm. One last question. I won't keep you any longer. As somebody who's on the air for 35 years, and I worked at Pacifica for 25 years, so freedom of speech is something that I treasure and took a lot of advantage of. And I do the same thing here on Sirius. Actually, we're not even subject to FCC rules out here in space or wherever I am broadcasting from, satellite radio. So, in fact, people on satellite radio frequently use words and discuss subject matter in ways that could never happen on terrestrial radio. But we try to limit it if we're trying to make a point. But you get somebody like Bill O'Reilly, who for a couple of years straight had frequent reports and denunciations by name of an abortion doctor in the Midwest, and made it very clear without actually saying the words it would be a good idea if that man was no longer on the earth. And sure enough, a man who was against abortions shot and killed that doctor, right? So the question I'm asking is, freedom of speech and responsibility. If I'm on here right now and I'm talking to people and I urge them to go somewhere and do something which is illegal, anything from, let's say, civil disobedience to maybe something even worse, which Mr. O'Reilly was clearly doing, what is my liability and responsibility as a broadcaster?
Well, the basic law, and it's only here and only because of the First Amendment, is that even if you advocate violence, illegal use of violence, that there can't be liability unless you mean for people to literally commit the act that you're talking about, and there's a high likelihood that they'll do it. So, we have cases in which people are giving speeches and denouncing blacks and Jews and Catholics and this and that. And even that, and again, only in America, but even that is held protected by the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And that is that's one of the good things, in my view, about where the First Amendment has been going in recent years, is that we've started to move to a time in which conservatives as well as liberals I've sort of signed on as a legal matter to core First Amendment values. I mean, it's something that's happened, in my view, because a time came when there were things that they thought they weren't allowed to say enough of. You know, demonstration around abortion clinics. They were sort of intellectual conservatives, very angry that Colorado or Denver could pass a law basically saying you couldn't speak to someone entering or nearby a medical facility by closer than 8 feet unless the person asked you to speak to them, which was obviously designed, to allow women to go into an abortion clinic without being harassed. But the statute wasn't limited to harassment. It was any speech at all. And the conservative members of the court, I should say the liberals on the court in those days, affirmed the constitutionality of that statute. The conservatives started citing all the old opinions of Justice Douglas and Justice Black, all the great liberal heroes of the past.
Well, when they needed it,
Right, and when they needed it and they started to cite it, and I think that it's now become assimilated as a general proposition into their views. So now you see cases where you get 8-1 votes affirming protection of speech of the most horrible, repulsive sort. Movies showing animals being tortured and killed. People demonstrating outside funeral homes of dead American soldiers and denouncing gays in the course of it. You get these 8-1 opinions saying, well, they have a right to say that. And all I can tell you is that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago.
So that's a really great advance in the general culture.
I think it is.
Okay, we were talking to Floyd Abrams, and the book is called Friend of the Court, On the Front Lines with the First Amendment. You really should get this book if you're interested at all in the First Amendment and freedom of speech, and how could you not be? So get the book. Thank you very much for coming on.
It's good to talk to you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, let's go to a break, and then we'll come back. Okay, we're back. That was Mr. Abrams, and the book really is a fascinating book, absolutely fascinating. If you're interested in free speech of any kind, libel, political speech, just plain outright, silly, stupid, vulgar speech, should it be protected, should it not? Where do you draw the line? He talks about WikiLeaks, compares it. He didn't have any chance to talk about the NSA in his book because the book was published before that even just recently published a few days ago, before that even was, a big news story. I was told before he came on that he had a limited amount of time, and I kept him on longer than he was supposed to be on, and he had to go somewhere and do some meeting or something like that. But what I would have asked him if he could stick around longer was, what is the law in a way? Isn't there something higher than the law? Or what does the law represent? In other words, he's defending R.J. Reynolds because the government was forcing them to put extraordinarily vile graphic illustrations of dead bodies and sick people and corroded lungs on their cigarette packages when they were just trying to sell a product. Now, his attitude is, if you want to declare that a product is poisonous or dangerous, then you put one of those labels on it, like it has to be prescribed by a physician, or people aren't allowed to buy it. You take it out of the stores. You say this is illegal. It's a poison, which tobacco is, right? So he's saying that the court and the law has no right to say this can't be done. That's up to the people of the United States by using, Congress to pass a law saying we all understand this is a poison. From now on, nobody can sell cigarettes because it kills people. Obviously, the same thing with guns. The other thing about Citizens United is his attitude is, which, by the way, Citizens United, a lot of people don't know this all the time, covered, I should say, before the Supreme Court overturned the statute. It covered both unions, left, theoretically, and right, corporations. That is not taking into account the reality, which is what I mean when I say we all understand that more than ever since I've been alive, and maybe more than ever in the United States of America, maybe you'd have to go back to the 1890s or something, rich people own and control and practically manipulate almost every member of Congress and the president, and some people even say the Supreme Court. So it's a sucker's game to say to people, you can go to Congress, you can use the vote, you can get these people to change the laws so that rich people can't do this, that, and the other. Yes, that's theoretically true, but it's never been less actually practical than it's ever been before. We all know, as he knows, that rich people own and run the government worse than ever before, and corporations, right? And they get away with murder, even literally. And we're going to talk about that in the 6 o'clock hour, where somebody who was very rich, Don Blankenship of Massey Energy, was so rich and so powerful that he actually bought the Supreme Court of the state of West Virginia. You know, he owned them by campaign donations and other things. So when we all see this day after day after day, year after year, that rich people own the government, then voting and the usual processes by which Mr. Abrams says that we can change things are a sad, stupid joke. And yet he's sticking with the Constitution and the law, which says that everybody has the right to express themselves, especially if it's political speech. So that's his point of view. But I can't recommend this book too highly. It's an amazing book for anybody who's interested in it. It's clearly written. There's not all kinds of legal jargon in it. As you heard him speak, the book is the same way. So if you want to call, we have time for one or two calls, 866-997-4748 after the 6 o'clock hour are really interesting. We got a guy? Okay. After the 6 o'clock hour, a really interesting book that was just written on a real life drama, legal drama of two lawyers who fought against this truly evil man. That's a hard word to use in this world, right? But Don Blankenship, who was the head of Massey Energy in West Virginia, and what finally happened with that case and what's still going on. So let's, who do we have? Jason, you're on, Jason.
Hey, I just wanted to talk about the Syrian situation.
We're not talking about that right now, but...
let's just tie it in. Let's imagine...
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sure, tie it in.
Yeah, let's imagine that you're some sort of a reporter and you want to start, blogging the truth about what's going on. How do you know you don't end up on some sort of a list?
But actually, right now, you're going to wind up on a list.
Right, and what happens, remember, is, let's imagine this is the first Gulf War.
Yeah.
And you're sitting around and you're talking about WMDs and how yellow aluminum tubes is all fictitious and this yellow cake stuff is fictitious and You've got contacts in the government. Now the problem is the government doesn't have to listen to your phone call. What they're going to do as a journalist is they're just going to start going through and figure out who called you.
Mm-hmm.
And who called, So now the whole point is I don't even need to listen to phone calls to know what's going on, in your life, to shut down whistleblowers. When you have all of these millions of, over 1 million people in the United States with top secret clearance, It's not because we have all of these secrets. It's because they want to make it so that people in the government will not talk about things for fear of being persecuted.
That's right.
And now just the fear of persecution will alter people's behavior.
In the law, they call that a chilling effect, and that's putting it politely. Basically, they're in advance, they're letting people know that if they do their jobs to uncover stories, especially stories about what the government does, that they're going to be in a lot of trouble, which tends to keep a lot of people from doing it because they'll wind up in jail, like you said.
And the big scare to me is this fact that, we're sitting here and these people are talking about whether or not there was some sort of a compromise and the whistleblower broke the law. I'm like, that's like saying, the German soldier who refused to shoot the prisoners was disobeying orders, so he should be punished. I mean, these were serious constitutional crimes being committed here by our own government, and people want to turn it around and somehow make it like the guy wasn't doing his job. I mean, what are you supposed to do? You work in a milk factory and find out they're poisoning people, and you're supposed to not say anything because you took a vow of silence.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. In the case of Bradley Manning, who is was and is a serving member of the armed forces, if you are in that situation, especially in a combat situation, you have the right, according to the Army Code and to the United States law, to disobey an unlawful or an immoral order.
So we're back to this whole thing that the administration is trying to twist this around You've got the neocon warmongers and all of these surveillance people on the right, just as there's much crazies on the left that want to maintain this thing that people in the government, look, the solution to everything is this: hyper-transparency. I mean, if they're going to put a camera and monitor my stuff, I want to be able to log in and see what every political person, from the president on down to every lobbyist, who they're talking to on their phone call.
See, now I'm with you. I'm with you completely on this, and I thought the same thing. Great minds think alike, maybe. I mean, basically, if they've got my phone logs, I want President Obama's phone logs, his wife's phone logs. I want
Absolutely.
Justice Roberts' phone logs. I want his daughter's phone logs. I want everybody's phone logs. In fact, I think either you decide everybody gets to know everything, or you don't do this kind of stuff to people, one or the other. And I would also suggest that maybe a way to solve this is that all Americans get top secret clearance at birth.
Right.
So that everybody knows everything all the time about everybody. Then there's no need to worry about this anymore,
But it's all a ruse. And I'm going to tie this into what's going on in Syria right now real quickly. Syria is all about the fact that the country of Qatar wants to build a natural gas pipeline. They have spent $3 billion. Okay, it's not getting reported in U.S. press. Okay, $3 billion on supporting these supposed rebels, which are really just paid mercenaries, which of course have their allegiance to the same terrorist groups. I mean, it's funny. Right now, Obama can authorize killing himself with a drone right now because by association, he is dealing with terrorists.
He fits the profile. He fits the profile.
Absolutely. McCain dealing with terrorists. Lindsey Graham talking about arming Al-Qaeda types. And of course, they're not just going to give them a bunch of rifles. They're talking about heavy weapons. Like, who's going to account for this if you get a missile launcher? Okay.
Everything they're doing is shown by all recent history with Afghanistan. History itself, morality, politics. The idea of getting involved in this war is wrong every single way you look at it.
And the thing that they don't want to talk about, really, what they're trying to do is they're trying to play a political game of brinkmanship with the Russians, because the Russians supply Western Europe with 75% of their energy needs. So what they want to do is they want to break this stranglehold that the Russians have by being able to pipe in natural gas from the Middle East. And the only way to do it is to go across Syria. You can go online. There's like plans for the pipelines. Like, you can see pictures of what the stuff looks like, but it's not getting reported. And you say to yourself, how come the left isn't talking about this? How come the right isn't talking about this? And the reason is because both of them are being controlled by the same groups that want this type of intervention. They want these type of wars to go on, and that's the scary part about it.
Well, another thing that's wrong with it is that we've obviously clearly entered into a period where it's normal, where people accept it as normal, that the president, that the executive can get us involved in a war without ever going to Congress again. That is completely overshadowed now. It doesn't exist anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, you would think back to the Vietnam when they were passing the War Powers Act and everything. It's like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? We tried to stop this, and history is filled with false flag things to try to drag Americans into war, whether it be the Lusitania in World War I, whether it be the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And you sit here as an American, and the problem is they know that in order to get middle America to support this, what they have to do is show you a picture of a bunch of dead babies, or talk about they're trying to take our freedoms, and or all of this other stuff that means absolutely nothing. I mean, again, let's think about this. The president, they gave him a Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't do anything, and now this guy is going to be arming people.
Oh well, the fact that they gave this man a Nobel Peace Prize means either that all of the Nobel Prize Committee was taking LSD and having sex with elephants at the same time, or they were trying to encourage him to actually do the right thing. One way or another, along with Henry Kissinger and a few other peoples, it's one of the great travesties of modern culture that he got the Nobel Peace Prize. I think the day after they gave it to him, he killed somebody in Afghanistan, personally. Yeah. So anyhow, listen, I got to go.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for
Okay, thanks for calling. Yeah, we're right up against the end of the hour. Can't take any more calls now. So stay tuned. After the 6 o'clock news, we're going to talk about what happened down in Virginia, which is a classic American problem. and why, in fact, we have such anger and rage about our government because they are owned by rich people. And here's an example coming up that we'll see in this legal crime sort of thriller, but true life thriller that was written about what happened in West Virginia. And that's after the 6 o'clock news. And what else? Oh, don't forget, Mr. Abrams isn't the only person who wrote a book. I wrote a book too. So if you haven't yet, looked at it or checked it out, you can go to Amazon and look at the book I just had published. It's called A Long Swim Upstream. A Long Swim Upstream. The story of a very strange, difficult, and perhaps really inspirational life, depending on how you look at it. And it's funny. A Long Swim Upstream. That's my book. So check it out on Amazon. You can read the first story for free if you go there. And we're back. This is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. As promised, we have a guest on who has written a fascinating, interesting new book. And it does read like, as I mentioned before, legal thriller, something the kind of thing that John Grisham would write. And in fact, there is on the front page, front cover of this book, which is called The Price of Justice, A True Story of Greed and Corruption, a little blurb by John Grisham, which says, superb, this is a book I wish I had written. And it really is no other word for it, but a page turner. But it's also about something real that happened and is still happening down in West Virginia. And it's something everybody needs to be concerned with, especially when you think about what we were talking about the last hour. So we have with us Lawrence Leamer, who is, in fact, the author of this new book, The Price of Justice, True Story of Greed and Corruption. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, you're welcome. Let me give people a little background on you. Lawrence Leamer is the best-selling author of 14 books, including The Kennedy Women and Madness Under the Royal Palms. Mr. Leamer is an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Harper's, and Playboy, and who has most recently written cover stories for Newsweek. And so what brought all of this to your attention in the first place?
Well, 40 years ago, I was living in New York, and I read an exquisite book called Night Comes to the Cumberlands by Harriet Cordell. It's about eastern Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And about the devastating poverty there and the exploitation of the coal companies and what people put up there. And I was a kind of a liberal guy, and I had been in the Peace Corps in Nepal. I'd done a lot of things. But that book just astounded me, that you could have these conditions in America. So in 1971, I just got in my car and I drove down to Appalachia. I ended up working in a coal mine. I worked for 3 months in a coal mine outside of Beckley, West Virginia. I broke my finger the third night. I got to know and have immense admiration for these miners. 100,000 miners have died in giving the coal that has been in basis of the industrial civilization. More miners have died than soldiers died in the Korean War and Vietnam War together. And so we can never forget how dependent we are on these people. And so, 40 years later, I read a story in the New York Times about how this Don Blankenship, the most powerful coal baron really in American history, had destroyed this man's coal mine, Hugh Caperton, driven into bankruptcy. And I thought, what a story this would be. I went down and met him, and then I went to Pittsburgh and met the two lawyers who are the heroes of my book, Bruce Stanley and Dave Fawcett.
And they, how did they get involved in this? I mean, what was their initial involvement?
Well, they had no idea that it would be 14 years.
I guess not.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they did a party at Reed Smith, their law firm in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, and Dave, when it was his turn to speak, he almost lost it because he looked out in that room, and there's his son, his 6'2" tall, 14-year-old son that was a baby when this thing started. Mm-hmm. So they got into it, obviously having no idea how long it would take, and I took it on a contingency basis. And they won. They took it in 1998. They won a $50 million jury verdict in 2002, and they thought this is it. But Blankenship was going to do whatever he could to destroy him, destroy them, and destroy his verdict, and that's what he did. He basically corrupted the Supreme Court of West Virginia. Several of the justices were corrupted.
You know, I've had conversations about the situation down there and the corruption, which is astounding. I mean, first of all, I live in New York State, and it's hard to beat the New York State legislature or even sometimes the judiciary for being corrupt. But West Virginia definitely wins the prize. I've had a man named Bob Kincaid on. You know Bob Kincaid? From Appalachian Healthcare Emergency. And I mean, he lives down there, and he's talked about this before. And I know Chris Hedges actually recently had a book come out, and one of the chapters was about the situation down there. So we've talked about this before, and the corruption involved. So maybe you could talk about the initial case. I mean, who is Hugh Caperton, and what happened that it became a lawsuit?
Well, Caperton just had this small coal mine in Virginia. He's from a family that has had coal mines for 3 generations, and they're a distinct minority in that state, and they treat the miners well. They had the town that they ran was very well run, and it was a place you could grow up and have a decent life. It was very unusual, and that's the way they saw business. Blankenship really goes back to the robber baron era. I mean, he was a member of the Tea Party before there was a Tea Party.
Well, but he started out. He didn't start out rich, though, right? Blankenship.
Oh no, he started out very poor. It's interesting because he and Bruce Stanley, one of the 2 lawyers, they're both from West Virginia. Mm-hmm. They both grew up in houses that didn't have indoor plumbing. Blankenship was an illegitimate child. His mother ran this little kind of the parents were divorced, and she ran this little grocery store 12, 14 hours a day. That's how he was brought up. He's a very bright kid. He grew up on his own and struggled, became an accountant, and got a job at Massey and worked his way up to be president. Caperton's brother, Hugh Caperton's brother, was a lawyer who was an executive at Massey. He was the other candidate to be president of Massey.
Oh, that's interesting.
He was well spoken. He had everything you would think he's going to be the executive, but Blankenship had the incredible drive and the fire in his belly of somebody up from poverty, and he became the head of the company.
I think in sports they call that a killer instinct, right?
Yeah, definitely. And he didn't believe. He does believe in government regulation. Mm-hmm. His first job, his first big job, was he was president of a Massey subsidiary in 1984-85 when there was a big strike. It was a strike. And United Mine Workers struck them, mm-hmm. and it's definitely the most important strike in the history of United Mine Workers, and it's one of the most important strikes in American history because it signals the beginning of the downfall of American labor unions, basically. And Blankenship had worked in a mine we dropped out of college for a year and needed money. Worked in a mine as a union miner. He knew the miners. He knew the mentality. He knew that these strikes, sooner or later, there'd be violence, mm-hmm. and the one that got blamed for the violence would lose. So he was in cahoots with a circuit judge, Elliott Maynard, who was a close friend, and Maynard just gave these decrees that the miners they couldn't march. They couldn't protest. Mm-hmm. They had nowhere for their energy, nowhere to go. And that's when a few of them turned to violence, and one strike-breaking driver was killed. At that point, the United Mine Workers called off the strike. And from then on, it's been downhill. The union really hardly exists anymore. It's mainly retirees and mm-hmm. disabled, and most people in the state and that whole region are non-union now. So when I worked in that mine, that was inconceivable. I mean, this militant union, mm-hmm. I thought would go on forever.
No, I mean, that's one of the most famous radical unions in the history of the United States. I mean, John O. Lewis.
Exactly.
It's extraordinary. Exactly. I mean, I remember reading about that horrible case where, was it Yablonsky? Yeah, maybe you could, recall that for people. Because that's part of...
Tony Boyle was a corrupt president of the union.
Right.
And there was to be an election. And Boyle ordered his henchmen to kill Ken Yablonsky, who was the reform candidate, mm-hmm. and killed his wife and killed his daughter as well.
Yeah,
when I was down there, that was just that. There was just turmoil in 71, a real turmoil in the union. It was a time of hope, and Arnold Miller became the president. And people thought there was great hope, but it didn't pan out.
So when we talk about Massey Energy, people are familiar. They may be saying to themselves, where have I heard that before? Well, it's not too long ago where you heard that. And maybe you could tell people about why they're familiar with Massey Energy without actually maybe quite remembering the details.
Well, first of all, it's It's the biggest coal company ever in that region. Mm-hmm. It controlled, at its peak, it controlled a third of all the seams of coal in that whole region, okay? And Blankenship ran it with an iron glove. In many of the mines, there was a cup that said it was like an old Dad's Root beer cup. It was Dad's Root beer. But in those mines, it stood for do as Don says. So you do exactly what he told you to do. That's what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And the safety, the bottom line was all that mattered. You do anything to get that coal out of there, okay? It was a non-union mine. You do whatever you had to do. And the safety was very bad. In 2006, there was a fire on Aracoma mine. 2 miners were killed. And Bruce Stanley, one of the 2 main characters in my book, took on the case of these 2 widows. And the week-long trial was the most devastating thing, where there were supposed to be safety inspections, safety drills. These were totally fake. The names were forged. There were no safety drills. The ventilation went backwards. Ventilation backwards. The fire hoses didn't work. We couldn't hook them together. Mm-hmm. And even if you could hook them together, it wouldn't do any good because there was no water. And so these 2 miners died. And Bruce got probably a $20 million judgment for these 2 widows. The feds then fined Massey $3.5 million. There was all these big headlines in the paper. That's the biggest fine ever. Isn't this great? This is justice. Well, it wasn't justice at all, because if you look at the fine print, it said that part of this agreement is that there'll be no criminal charges against any Massey executives. So Blankenship went on doing just what he had done before. And 4 years later, the Upper Brig Branch mine, another Massey mine, blew up. 29 miners were killed. And it was exactly the same problem in that mine as it had been in the Aracoma mine 4 years before.
But this time, some of the executives did go to jail, right?
Well, what happened this time is because of what Bruce Stanley had done in the Aracoma mine. He'd alerted the media. He'd exposed the culture of Blankenship and culture of Massey and what it stood for. And he showed in that week, for example, there was one witness, Johnny Brown, who had to work 7 days a week, 35 days straight, often in water up to his hips or at least up to his knees. Again, if there had been a union, those guys would have walked out of their place, but they needed the jobs, and they're afraid, man, there's no other work down there, so this is it. So because of this, because of what Stanley had done, and because of the reporting, Blankenship had to retire. He retired with a $79 million package. That's what he walked off with. And Massey then was sold to Alpha, another coal company. So Massey doesn't exist anymore. And Booth Goodwin, whose father was a federal judge, is a U.S. attorney like they've never had, and he has systematically gone after these people. Nobody would believe that it was possible that Blankenship would be criminally indicted. But Goodwin started with a low end. He foreman and lower end executives. He convicted 4 executives, and now in the last one he convicted Hugart. When he was before the judge said, "Well, who told you to do this thing? This is a conspiracy. Who told you to do it?" Mm-hmm. And Hugart, he couldn't even bring himself. He was so scared to say Blankenship's name, but he said the CEO, and the CEO is Blankenship. So I suspect in the next 2 or 3 weeks, Blankenship is going to be criminally indicted. And it's not going to be for Mickey Mouse charges. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be like Al Capone having tax charges. To get him. This is going to be very serious charges against this guy.
And so one of the reasons why finally this man who comes close to being a description of perhaps, I hate to throw this, I used it before, but I hate to use this word evil, but if anybody could approximate this person, who his lack of regard for other human beings' lives or welfare or health or anything. So finally they may get him. But as you point out in your book, one of the reasons why is because of the atmosphere of people pursuing justice like these 2 lawyers in this case, right?
Yeah, but there's so few people who do that. The trial lawyers let people make money with these, taking these cases on contingency where somebody's in an automobile accident and hurt, and there are billboards all over the state. These lawyers are happy to do that. But are they going to take the kind of tough cases that Bruce Stanley has taken? No way. Are they going to really stand up? Did they condemn the corrupt West Virginia Supreme Court? No. Does the press stand up? The press, the only paper in the state that wrote a review of my book, which is I'm not tooting my own horn here. It's the most important book that's been written about this region in a long time. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And does it deserve a review? Yes. If you want to attack it in the review, go ahead. But you can't. You have to talk about it. And the Charleston Gazette is the only paper that reviewed it. And even there, it wasn't even a review. They just talked about some of the material that was in the book, and they didn't even talk about the most controversial. They didn't talk about the corruption of the Supreme Court. They didn't talk when the case came to the Supreme Court, when Dave Foster was giving Caperton's side of it. Elliott Maynard got up and walked out of the courtroom.
Well, maybe
the next. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because we're using names that they're obviously it's all in the book, and people should definitely get this book. The Price of Justice.
Elliott Maynard, I mentioned him earlier.
Yeah.
He was a circuit judge in southern West Virginia in 1984-85 when the United Mine Workers Union was broken. He then became a justice on the West Virginia Supreme Court. He continued to be friendly. Blankenship was a very close friend of his. In fact, it comes out in my book. These photos come out of Blankenship and Elliott Maynard, the Chief Justice of the West Virginia Supreme Court, off together in France with their mistresses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so Maynard had to recuse himself. But that came afterwards. But the first time when they decided the judgment, they go in chambers and they're going to decide on this $50 million judgment in the trial. Are they going to say that's okay, or are they going to turn it back? In a minute, they decided they were going to go Massey's way on this. And how do I know that? Because one of the justices, Larry Starchard, cooperated with me. And so not only his story, but his diary. In a minute. They didn't even know why they were going to turn this thing back. They figured out later. So in a minute, they turned it. It was then with interest $70 million. They turned it back.
Well, the problem is, of course, that we should go back and discuss the original case so people know what the structure is. But obviously, you have Massey is also famous. Blankenship is famous for being upset about one particular judge and spending over $3 million to get rid of this judge down there because he didn't like him.
Well, no, that's what he did in 2002 when he loses he loses this $50 million verdict in the West Virginia Supreme Court, and he's infuriated, and he threatens to pull Massey out of the state, and he's going to do anything to stop this. And there's a 5-person elected court, and so he spends $2.5 million. And what does he do? He does what it was becoming increasingly common all across America wherever justices are elected. You look for some issue that judges voted on that you can use to destroy him. And there was a young man called Tony Arbel who had brought up way back in the Hollows in a very sick, incredibly sick home where sexual abuse was just endemic. It was like you and I might go out and play baseball. They would play these sexual games, and he was sexually molested by his mother's friends and family members. And when he was 9 or 10 years old, he started having sexual games with his younger brother. Mm. They were taken away by social services when they were 14. The younger brother told about this because he didn't think it was immoral. It's just a natural thing. Tony admitted what he had done, and he pled guilty to one count. He was sentenced at the age of 14 to 15 to 35 years in prison.
Whoa.
Okay. A few years later, this comes before in 2004, this comes before the Supreme Court of West Virginia, and Larry Starcher, who's a progressive, sees this, and he says, this is terrible. This kid should have another chance, He's in his early 20s then. And he goes to 2 of the other justices, the 2 other liberals, and they vote to set him out. But Justice Davis, who was then the Chief Justice, I think sees this as a device to destroy one of those other justices, Justice McGraw, who was up for election, and voted to free him. So then Blankenship took this case, and Tony Arbro is living in Wheeling, West Virginia. He has a job unloading fruit trucks at night. He's doing just fine. He's going to AA. Everything's just going great. He gets up in the morning. He's walking downtown. He looks up, and there's a billboard. And high in the billboard is his picture and Justice McGraw's picture, and it says, Justice McGraw has freed this child rapist. And he walks a half mile down the road, and there's another billboard. So he is destroyed. He is destroyed. And that money spent in one of the most vicious campaigns ever to destroy Justice McGraw by this campaign saying that he'd freed a child rapist.
Well, was that Blankenship's personal money, or was it Massey Energy's?
It was his personal money. Not only his personal money, but he wrote a lot of the ads. He's a hands-on guy in everything.
So let's go back to Mr. Caperton, because that's what the original case is. You've got these two courageous lawyers who spent 14 years of their life, by the way, paying a serious personal price, which is something you spell out in the book. But who is it? Mr. Caperton had a small mind, and you say he was decent to his employees. But Blankenship, what? He wanted control of this mine, or he wanted to buy it, or what?
In 2007, Massey Energy bought a company, bought a new company, and this company was buying Caperton's coal.
Mm-hmm.
They had a long-term agreement, and when Massey originally bought it, Caperton thought, this is great. This is a big company. They're going to take care of me. They've got this long-term contract to buy this coal at this price, and but you know, this guy's the bottom line, and he figures. And by the bottom line, he's a very, very smart guy. And when he's figuring the bottom line, he's figuring, I'm going to do this, and maybe they're going to sue me, and I got to factor in the cost of the lawsuits, and then I got to see if it's worthwhile doing.
That's Blankenship we're talking about. Yeah,
that's Blankenship.
Yeah.
So in this case, he finds a technical reason called force majeure, which is in a lot of business contracts, which says if there's an act of God, if there's a hurricane or a fire or a strike, then you don't have to fulfill the contract. And there was a coke plant where they sold the coal to,
mm-hmm.
and that was closing down. And he used that as force majeure, which it wasn't at all. And when he came to visit Caperton, and Caperton said, well, I'm going to sue you. And Blankenship said, you sue me if you want, but I spend $1 million a month on lawyers, and I'll destroy you.
Mm.
And so what's he going to do? And Blankenship says, you know what I'm going to do? I'll buy your coal mine. That's what I'll do. And so then they begin negotiating. And Blankenship cuts it down more and more, so it's really nothing. Not enough so he can pay off his debts, not enough so he can pay the miner's retirement, but he just has to accept this little sum. And then the last minute, they're willing to sign the contract where Massey's going to buy Caperton's company. And at the last minute, Blankenship says, no, I'm not going to sign it, and just drives him into bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. So these two lawyers, Mr. Caperton found them, or they decided to seek him out, or how did it work? How did they get together?
Caperton found Dave Fawcett, mm-hmm. who's these two lawyers are very different. He's a third-generation Pittsburgh lawyer. He's a tall, thin, very elegant person, very meticulous person. Okay,
mm-hmm.
and he has to be in the lead. He has to do everything himself. He has to be in control. But because there's a corporate side to this and a personal side, he had to bring in a second lawyer. So he brought in his friend Bruce Stanley. Bruce Stanley is is short. He's husky. He's a very instinctive guy. He goes by the seat of his pants. He'll go into courtroom and be very spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very different kind of a lawyer, and a brilliant lawyer of a different sort.
So, as you write in the book, Dave is the kind of guy who goes into court with an absolute plan, and if things don't work out, he gets a little juggled right in court. He can't hang if the plan isn't stuck to.
Yeah, and you see this happening.
Mm.
You see him mess up several times, and I give these guys immense credit for another reason. Is I let them see the manuscript, which I've never in 14 books. I've never done that before, and I did. I thought, I was nervous doing it because they're lawyers; they could sue me, right? They don't like it.
Right.
Okay. Not only didn't they, the amazing thing was neither one. There was not a single thing about them that they tried to make themselves look better. They didn't want any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave, in particular, found more negative things that he had done that he wanted to put in the book because he wants the truth to be stored. The truth is he had messed up here, and he wanted that to be in the book. I just found that so amazing. So you see the flawed qualities of both of them, and in the end, you admire them more because of that.
So they take on his case, right? And then what happens? Yeah. What's the next step? Did they sue Massey?
Yeah, they sue Massey, and they win in 2002. They win this $50 million verdict, and that's the thing that comes to the West Virginia Supreme Court, that Blankenship corrupts the court. And then they take it to the United States Supreme Court, where Ted Olson, who's the leading conservative appellate lawyer in America. In fact, we owe the blessings of George W. Bush to Ted Olson.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that case before the Supreme Court in Bush Gore, okay? Very conservative guy. But he takes this, and now he's on this same-sex marriage. He and David Boies are lawyers on that, so he's kind of taking cases on the other side of things now.
Yeah.
And this is clearly on the other side. And so he took the case, and he argued it before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that you can't spend that kind of money to elect a justice who's going to go ahead and vote your way. The justice has to recuse himself.
Mm-hmm. So that's in fact why. So they won on that issue, right? I mean, basically because
they won, but then it went back to the West Virginia Supreme Court,
mm-hmm.
and the West Virginia Supreme Court is so corrupt that for the third time they turned this down. And so what was left? And this is after 13 years now. And Capers hasn't had a job for all these years. He's just sitting in his house.
Mm.
And so they go to Virginia. They can think, well, we're going to try to file it in Virginia. What can we do? They file it in Virginia. And the circuit court says, no, you can't do this. And they appeal it to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And I figured, no way. It's a conservative court. There's no way they're going to see this. Mm-hmm. But a few weeks ago, they came through in this 27-page opinion and said that, yes, this can go to trial. Now, that is an appointed court. And through this book, I'm a big proponent of appointed justices, mm-hmm. especially with all this money coming in, all these problems, these bad justices, in cases like Pennsylvania and Texas, all these cases of this. The Virginia Supreme Court is a conservative court. These aren't liberal justices, mm-hmm. but they reminded me. I gave a dinner party with a friend of mine a few months ago for Andrew Young, mm-hmm. and there were about 25 people. And somebody got up and said, "Oh yeah, we're all Democrats here, rah rah rah." And Andrew Young said, I don't quite see it that way. During the Civil Rights Movement, at the time of the Selma March, you know what saved us? It was when we marched and we reached an area which was overseen by a Republican judge. Mm-hmm. The Republican judge, they cared about the law. Now, were those judges necessary for civil rights? I don't think so.
Right.
But they were for the law and for the Constitution.
Well, that's also, I mean, one of the ironies when you think about it. What president was it that sent the army in so that people could have their civil rights? It was a Republican president,
Right. Exactly.
Well, so I think the other thing that's one of the other things that's exciting about the book is you get into the personal lives of all these people, and these two lawyers. It's like an obsession that went on for 14 years, an absolute obsession.
Yeah, and
it took a toll, right?
With Dave, for instance, his wife had a lot of problems, and he got a divorce, and they were fighting not over custody. He wanted half custody of his children, mm-hmm. and it came to be decided right after the 6-week trial in 2002, in which they won the $50 verdict. And this compulsive anal guy, he just was down there working like crazy for this verdict. Okay, his wife had the kids, and he thought it was okay for the 6 weeks. But then when they come back there, and the psychiatrist says, "Well, Mr. Foster, if you love your children so much, where were you for these 6 weeks?" Mm-hmm. And they took away the custody of the children from him, okay? Bruce has his wonderful wife and two wonderful daughters, but they so obsessed he was in the middle of the night. And these guys, either one of them would email me at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You're just as likely to get an email from at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning as you are 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm telling you. That's how much they work. That's how obsessed they are with this.
So I guess this is one of those books it's interesting enough and well written enough so that even now that you've heard, a lot of this story, it's still something that like minute by minute, day by day, week by week, you keep turning the pages and you're interested in what's going to happen. So it's when you write these kinds of books, have you ever written any fiction?
I wrote one novel, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess where you feel like you shine is writing about things that are really dramatic in real life, and it almost reads like, as Grisham says, a kind of a legal thriller, right?
Well, I'll tell you what is that there's a lot of courtroom stuff, there's a lot of legal stuff, mm-hmm. and I wanted to have a big audience for this, and I knew I can't have it read just a book for lawyers. I've got to, and I rewrote this thing so many times. So once you get into it, it's a real read. You're not thinking, you're just enjoying it as you're reading. And that I tried very hard to get that.
Has anybody, I suppose you get asked this all the time, but has anybody already optioned this for a movie?
There's people trying to put it together right now. They're actually going to Aaron Sorkin, who's probably the best screenwriter. And I'm sure he's backed up for years, but they're going to approach him and see if we do the screenwriting.
Well, he'd be the perfect person for just for the very slightest reason is for the pace of the thing. I mean, the way that he's famous for the movie.
No, he'd
thing.
be great. He would bring so much to it. He'd be terrific.
Well, again, everybody check this book out. Also, I mean, there are plenty of larger lessons here, and we were having a long conversation earlier. In the first hour of the show, we talked to Floyd Abrams, the free speech lawyer.
Sure.
And he's got a brand new book out. And the whole idea of, we had this long discussion because Mr. Abrams, late in his life, decided to defend Citizens United. So he kind of switched, from one side to the other, if you look at things that way. But he didn't see it that way anyhow. But the whole idea is that, and you see it in this book, is when you have to appear before a judge or you have to rely on legislatures to make the laws and to enforce the laws and to make decisions on the laws, they are corrupt. Where does that leave you if you're a regular citizen? And this is perhaps one of the most, if not the most egregious example that we could possibly have of what
right,
happened.
And also, some people say, "Oh, it's West Virginia, so what?" Well, that's just unacceptable. There's justice all across America. There's not. We've got to care. In this case, and these issues are crucial issues for all of American life.
Mm-hmm. So basically, there isn't much more to say except if you want to read a great book and you want to find a book that is going to keep you entertained on every page, and that you finally see some justice done, which is nice in this era where things seem to be going in the other direction all the time. The book is The Price of Justice, A True Story of Greed and Corruption. Author is Lawrence Leamer, Leamer, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, and just watch the newspapers in the next couple of weeks. I think you're going to read about Blankenship being criminally indicted.
Well, that would be nice to see, because then you would see a little spark of justice in what is otherwise a very dark sea of injustice, he says. All right, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, absolutely.
Bye.
Okay, this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. I guess we could take a break right now. What do you think? Would be taking a break? Yeah, I think we'll take a break. That's a good idea, right? Yeah, good. I'm glad you agree.
Sirius XM Left 127. Think.
I think ethics is a huge problem in Washington.
Expect more. Sirius XM Left 127.
I love that ad. I think ethics is a huge problem in Washington. I think that the Statue of Liberty is very tall. I think water is wet. All right, anyhow. So earlier, actually, I was going to talk about this. Let me remind you, after the 7 o'clock news, we're going to talk some more about what's going on with this NSA case, the NSA spying, and everything about that. And there's more revelations. Don't forget, Mr. Edward Snowden, who released some of these documents and certainly told the world that the NSA was spying on everybody, not just phone logs, you understand. And as I'm glad that the caller called earlier and pointed out that phone logs are very damaging. It's not just that they are looking at, your calls, but to remember exactly the fact that they're looking at who you called and who called you. That is not their business unless they have what's called probable cause. And they just threw a blanket over the entire country and said, you're all potentially guilty, and, checked everybody, and they have a record of everybody's phone logs. Then we find out, and we're finding out more all the time, that this government, not my government anymore, I don't think it's your government anymore. I don't know whose government it is. Well, I think we all know whose government it is. They have decided that it wasn't enough. They decided it wasn't enough to do this. For the last several years, they have been forcing by court order, and who knows how cooperative these companies have been. All the companies that like Yahoo and like Microsoft and Facebook and all these other companies that have all this information on everybody, because everybody's life is inside their computer now, and every email you send. They have every single email that you ever sent to anybody if you're on any of these major companies, and probably the smaller ones too. And we're only finding out about all of this stuff. We're finding out that actually we do not, in fact, anymore live in a real democracy. And how do we find this out? Because somebody decided, however mixed his motives were, whatever his personality is like, if you go by what he said, he did it because he thought it was just wrong what they were doing. And of course, he couldn't be more right about how wrong they are. And so he revealed all this. Now, we would never know this unless he broke his law, unless he broke his bond or his trust. So you've got these prostitutes, pimps, and corporate puppets in Washington, on the Justice Department, the president, and people in Congress screaming and yelling. They want to kill him. They want to crucify him. They want to arrest him. They want to shoot him. They want to bring him back to the United States, and he's a traitor. And they're going on and on and on and that. The real criminals in this case, the actual criminals, the violators, the rapists of the Constitution, the people who have really broken their bonds of trust and faith with the people of the United States and with democracy itself, are the president, the Justice Department, Congress, the people in these committees who oversee this and knew all about it, Justice John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who appoints the FISA judges. Now, it's all lawful. Why is it lawful? Because the people who make the laws and who judge the laws say it is. And these people no longer have any connection whatsoever, no valid or tangible connection to the great mass of American citizens. Why do you think it is that nobody fucking votes in this country? I was looking at the election results in Iran, right? I'm going over different candidates. And one thing they mentioned was that of eligible voters, 75% in a country like this, right? In a country where, they kill people and shoot people and lock people up forever and disappear people if they disagree with the government. In a country like this, where they have no privacy either, 75% of eligible voters turned out to vote in Iran. In fact, there are very few countries in the world where 50% or less than 50% of the voters turn out to vote in a presidential election. We are almost at the very bottom. And forget about, first world, second world, third world. This country, in anything that approximates a democracy or even something that's not a democracy, essentially like Iran, but sort of looks like one and acts like one sometimes. This country is so far down the list now of voter turnout. Now, why is that? Why is the United States almost at the bottom of voter turnout in every country in the world that has an election? I mean, it's quite extraordinary when you think that the government of the United States and, prominent speakers and people like, on sort of like right-wing talk radio or Fox News, they're all talking about we're the greatest democracy. We are the freest country. In fact, I guess we're not anymore. Now, is it going to finally dawn on most Americans? I mean, most of us, people who are, let's say, maybe I know it, you know it, right? But most people don't seem to know it. Now, when you get a revelation like this, as one of the people who writes to me frequently, one of my listeners who writes to me frequently, he said, now the sheep may actually look up, which is to say that they shear us for our wool every 2 or 4 years. They cut us up into little portions and roast us and fry us and bake us and eat us. But finally, maybe people will decide that they're tired of being sheep for these people, and they will wake up and exercise their real right to democracy. In the Declaration of Independence, it says that when a government no longer represents the will of the people, when they are actually opposed to the will of the people, when the government no longer is capable of ensuring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but actively opposes it, that the people of that country or that place have a right to overthrow the government. Revolution, boys and girls, revolution is built into our Constitution. Revolution is the birth of this country was in revolution. And revolution is written into our controlling document. The spiritual basis of the United States of America is the Declaration of Independence. And in there it says very carefully and very clearly that a government is supposed to represent the will of the people and to guarantee the people, or to try at least to secure the people in everything it does to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This government has ceased to do that. And it says in that document, and it was acted upon and thereupon became the United States of America, that such people in such a place have the right to overthrow the government. The words are to, I'm paraphrasing, the words are to reject that government, to disconnect themselves from that government, to no longer obey the laws of that government. When they make laws which are unlawful, then your duty, your moral and higher legal duty is to disobey those laws. This is what I believe Mr. Snowden did. Now, life is complicated. I've been around for a long, long time, walking around here on the planet Earth. I've been walking around so long on this planet that my feet hurt all the time. That's how long I've been walking around, ladies and gentlemen. So I know that life is complicated. People do things that are sometimes very crazy, or even what other people call heroic or courageous. They have very strange mixed motives sometimes. Very few people, or nobody actually, is pure. People do things for different motives. Sometimes you can find somebody like Martin Luther King or Gandhi or somebody like that, and they have their own psychological drives and their own complex motives. But clearly, if you examine somebody like that, or those two guys, you'll see, and you know other people like this, they exist, you'll see that their motives are as close to pure as possible. They feel truly, not talking about bullshit Clinton, they actually do feel the pain of other people. They cannot tolerate injustice. They cannot stand by and see people oppressed and murdered and their rights denied or taken away anymore. Nobody else is capable of doing it. Apparently, they step forward and they do it, and they pay the price for it. Jail, beatings, spying, government spying on them. Hoover spied on Martin Luther King so bad that he tried to get blackmail information and actually try to persuade the man to kill himself because he was going to reveal information about his life. This is what happens when you step forward and do this. Edward Snowden is 29 years old. He has a life story, and now we know more about people's personal lives than we ever did, more than we ever even perhaps want to know about them, right? Everything he tried to do, apparently, if you read about his life, it didn't quite work out. And he discovered that he didn't like being in the Army. He discovered that he didn't like working in the CIA. He discovered this, he discovered that. Well, people have different paths in life. So he has a habit of joining organizations which he possibly, in this day and age, should have already known are not famous for their sense of equality and justice. You don't join the U.S. Army, especially he enlisted for the Special Forces. You don't join a group like that. You don't join the CIA, and you don't work for the NSA in this day and age if you're interested in equality, justice, and democracy. So he should have known better. He's so bright, and he seems very bright. He should have already known better. So there's something a little odd about that. Meanwhile, you know what? I don't care. He did what he did, and I think that we all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude. Here is an opportunity for all of us, even the people who don't want to see it and don't believe that it's actually true, no matter what kind of denial they're capable of dredging up from the bottom of their fox-polluted souls. You can't deny now that our government is no longer a democratic government. And it doesn't make any difference, clearly, who you vote for at a national level. They are all in bed with each other, and you are not allowed into the bedroom. You don't belong there anymore. That's their government. It's not yours. So what do you have a right to do about that? According to the Declaration of Independence, you have a right to take it back by any means necessary. That's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. That's what our founders did. The people who we revere as the founders of the United States of America, as the authors of democracy, wrote in our founding document that when the government no longer represents the will of the people or the good of the people, that the people need to separate themselves from that government and reform it one way or another. Now, it is to be hoped, and it's still my hope, that we can do that with civil disobedience. I am certainly not encouraging active revolution for various reasons, but I am not encouraging that. What I'm saying is we are guaranteed the right in this country to reform our government, to separate ourselves from this government, to look upon it with clear eyes and see that it is no longer our government, and to take it back one way or another. My advice is to take it back through massive civil disobedience. Will people do that now? I don't know. And as somebody showed clearly before, the government is so out of control that the President of the United States now has his own personal army. It's called the United States Army. He has his own personal Air Force. It's called the U.S. Air Force. He has his own personal Marine Corps called the United States Marines. He has his own personal Navy. He has his own personal spy agency. Just opened a brand new center in Utah, which cost almost $2 billion. We can't feed old people in this country. We can't give people treatment that will save their lives on Medicaid. We can't help poor people. We can't even give people food stamps anymore. But we can spend $2 billion. We're laying off teachers. We're laying off cops. We're laying off firefighters. We can't hire inspectors for the FDA so we don't all get fucking poisoned. But we can spend $2 billion. Not we. They can spend $2 billion to build something to spy on all of us. What world are we living in here? Is this a democracy? Clearly not. The question is, what do we do about it? I really don't know anymore. All I can see, the only avenue I see, and we're going to talk about Snowden and the NSA spying after the 7 o'clock news. The only thing I can see anymore is, as I said, and I said often, massive civil disobedience. You got to target these government buildings, target the government itself. You got to target the big banks. You target hedge fund offices. You target lobbying groups, and you stand outside their buildings. You don't let them walk in or out. They're going to hit you with sticks. They're going to fire pepper spray at you. They're going to shoot rubber bullets at you. They're going to lock you up. Forget about investigating you or tapping your phone. You know, they already do that. In other words, I'm saying, how much more do we have to lose? Well, nobody wants to get physically hurt. Nobody wants to get locked up. I think unless that actually happens, unless people put themselves and block the doorway, as Mario Savio, who was the leader of the free speech movement in Berkeley in the 60s, he said sometimes you have to throw a wrench into the machinery. We need to throw a wrench into the machinery. Edward Abbey, based on that comment, Edward Abbey, if you never read any of Edward Abbey's novels, he's one of the great American writers, flourished, I'd say, probably in the late 60s through the 80s. Edward Abbey wrote a book once called a terrific novel. It's called The Monkey Wrench Gang. The Monkey Wrench Gang. And it's about a bunch of people who were so in love with the land out in Utah that they used physical means. They crippled machinery. They actually destroyed machinery, earth-moving machines and tractors and other things. They were going to be used to cut down a whole forest to build a mine, to create a mine. It was a coal mine, I think, or a gold mine. And it's called The Monkey Wrench Gang. It's a great novel. Sometimes you got to throw a monkey wrench. You got to throw a wrench into the machinery. If we don't do that, they are going to take what's left of democracy, which is very little at this point, wrap it all up in a big bow, and throw it down the deepest well. There's almost nothing left. If this is not a turning point, I don't know what could be. What do we have? Okay, from Wisconsin, you're on. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm listening to all this. And how well did Occupy Wall Street turn out?
How well did it turn out? It fizzled.
Yeah, how well did that turn out?
It fizzled, and there's reasons for that, that's for sure.
Right. Well, people in this country just work for the weekend. 10% of the population basically know what's going on, and about 90% are waiting for a National Football League to start up. And so, I don't see, if Occupy Wall Street fizzled and you had these militia troops out there beating up hippies.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't just hippies, by the way. It was also just plain middle-class people who got beat up in those places.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, but it was promoted by Fox News as, these unwashed hippies living in this park.
No, Fox News.
Fox News, right. And the majority of the people bought into that. And basically, I think the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street should have joined forces. Then there might have been something to... So your point of view is basically that the country is screwed. In other words, people care. That's
they just don't care enough. They're so busy trying to have fun and have barbecues.
We're so damn busy working 3 jobs because the unions have been broken up.
Right.
I'm working 70 hours a week myself.
Shoo.
And I'm non-union. If I try to start a union, I'll be fired. So,
So what do you think? I mean, what is the future of this country? Does it have a future?
The future of this country will be broken up into 5 regions. You'll have the Northeast, you have the Northwest, Southwest, you have a middle portion of the country, and you have the South. That's where we're going. Because the next, you'll get this Republican president. The next one, you have Sean Hannity promoting Rand Paul oh, when are you going to run? When are you going to run? We're going to get this. We're in like the Wehrmacht regime at the moment of pre-Nazi Germany. So that's where we're going. People are just scared out of their wits by this president, and we're going to end up with someone like who knows what.
So in the name, in the name of liberty and of the founders, he's going to take us all the way off the deep end of the right.
Well, all the capitalists love China. I mean, they have China has embraced capitalism. Of course, they're still communists.
Well, okay, China, communist, I don't know, China is a corporate military state, which is something
and that's where we are going.
Exactly. We are fast becoming exactly like it. I mean, China and the United States should just join up and form one country because it's basically the same kind of place now, you know. Anyhow, so listen.
That's where we're going to be at.
All right. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Okay. That's it. We're through for this hour, and we're going to see you again after the 7 o'clock news when we'll talk some more in detail with a lawyer from a place called the Electronic Frontier Foundation about NSA spying and about Mr. Snowden and what's been going on. Actually, we may not discuss Mr. Snowden. I think he just wants to talk about the principle of what's going on and electronic spying and electronic eavesdropping in this country, and do we have any rights left, or how do we avoid this, or how do we change it? So that will be after 7 o'clock. Okay, we're back. Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. We are continuing our conversations of earlier about the NSA case and the recent leaks. And there are many questions to ask about this. We have a guest with us tonight to talk about this, Hani Fakhoury, who is a staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and he works on issues surrounding the intersection of technology and criminal law, privacy and free speech, which is obviously what all this is about. And Mr. Fakhoury has argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on warrantless cell tracking and testified before the California State Legislature on proposed electronic privacy legislation. Prior to joining EFF, he worked as a federal public defender in San Diego, where he tried numerous cases and argued multiple times before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Interesting. Let's see. It says here that the warrantless cell tracking. This is not the first time this has come up. I mean, we had the big exposure in 2005, 2006, right? The original exposure of this with the NSA.
Right. Yes, and in that case, it was really about warrantless wiretapping of phone calls and communications. Going through phone lines. So these new revelations show that the program. It was not necessarily the same program, but the spirit of the program has unfortunately lived on, and it looks like in even broader ways than originally imagined.
But so that was warrantless wiretapping. Now, theoretically, all of this stuff that's being done here is done, quote unquote, legally. In other words, it's all justified legally. It's warranted wiretapping, correct?
Well, I think we can kind of quibble with that.
Okay.
The big issue in the original program that President Bush put in place, and shortly after 9/11, that was the subject of the 2005 and exposure of this deal was a situation where the NSA was collecting phone call records without getting a warrant, a search warrant, and they weren't even going to the FISA court to get some of this information. And so when that program came to light, there was Congress changed the law to put a little bit more oversight by the FISA court to ensure that type of surveillance was reined in. Now, what we're seeing now is we're seeing these programs like PRISM and the Order of Verizon are ostensibly have warrants, meaning, well, they don't really have search warrants. They do have orders from the FISA court authorizing the surveillance, but we still have problems with whether or not that is enough to make them legal for a number of reasons. And the first reason is we've argued that there's no way that this type of order would be appropriate under FISA in and of itself, just because the order is so sweeping and broad. And then second, we think that there are some serious Fourth Amendment problems with the surveillance that's going on.
Now, the original FISA law, I mean, obviously we can't get into all the details here, but the original FISA law was a result of the Church Committee hearings in 75?
Yes, exactly. So FISA was Congress's attempt to regulate, the ability for the federal government to engage in electronic surveillance and eavesdropping.
Now,
and so FISA was originally supposed to be a check on that power.
So what does it stand for? Foreign intelligence?
Foreign intelligence. So FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Okay. So and the purpose of that was to do what?
It was to put some limits in place at the government's ability to engage in wiretapping and electronic surveillance and eavesdropping. And what it really was aiming to do was to say, look, when it comes to surveillance of people in foreign countries, the government has to follow certain procedures in order to obtain that information and in order to engage in that type of wiretapping. And the Church Committee was this committee led by Senator Church, who essentially learned of a lot of abuses of the surveillance powers under the Nixon administration and recommended a series of proposals, and that ultimately became FISA. Now, one part of FISA was the establishment of what's called the FISC. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which is a court that is authorized to hear government applications to engage in this type of surveillance and is supposed to, provide some sort of check on the executive branch's ability to engage in this type of surveillance.
Now, the magic word here seems to be, at least one of them, foreign. In other words, if the original intent of the law to monitor, or to have surveillance on calls or electronic communications that involved people who lived in foreign countries or weren't American citizens, did that include also originally in the original law Americans making calls to foreigners?
Yes. And, the law as originally contemplated, the idea was that if there was at least someone on the other line of that call that was in another country and that was associated or had connections to terrorism or, known kind of state-sponsored terrorism. So it wasn't just like some random guy who wanted to blow some stuff up, but somebody who was kind of affiliated with, a rogue regime or someone we were at war with, that was the type of surveillance that was authorized. And as you correctly noted, surveillance of U.S. citizens or Americans within the United States was prohibited under FISA. The NSA is not permitted to engage in that type of surveillance. Mm-hmm. Now, when FISA was enacted in the 70s, there was no such thing as the Internet. So, when you made a phone call from Texas to Saudi Arabia, for example, it was pretty clear you were capturing someone who was foreign, mm-hmm. and, because you knew that the phone call was ending up in a foreign country.
Well, that could happen to anybody. Like, for instance, let's say you're a Texas oil man and you wanted to call up somebody in Saudi Arabia. That would have come under that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, that's not to say that there aren't necessarily legitimate reasons to call foreign countries. Of course there is, but the issue is that at the time it was first put into place, it was almost easier to kind of fall within the rubric of what FISA was intended to cover. The mm-hmm. problem with the programs that we've learned about now is that, communication now is, people are communicating all over the place with people all over the place, and the chances that communication is going to involve Americans is much more heightened.
Mm-hmm. But the law never intended the domestic calls from, let's say, from somebody in New York State to somebody in California, or somebody in one county to somebody else in another county, or in parts of a city to another part of the city. In the domestic United States, that law was not supposed to cover that, right?
Absolutely. That is governed under the Fourth Amendment, the Wiretap Act, and our traditional domestic surveillance statutes. FISA was not supposed to cover that type of communication.
So what we're learning here is, if I'm reading it correctly, and there's almost more information than you could possibly digest, I understand that your organization is so overwhelmed by it all that you probably could put on another 20 people to keep track of it. But
yeah, we could use some help.
Well, so it was never intended to include. And let me ask you another question, and this has to do with legal things. Did they have, even if there was a foreign call from a domestic origin of to a foreign call, did they have to have probable cause even in that case, or just any call at all could be monitored or logged? They
didn't need probable cause, but they also did not need it couldn't just be any call. They needed to have some individualized suspicion that the person on the other end of the call was someone who was engaging or contemplating engaging in acts of terrorism. Mm-hmm. So there were limits to what could be. There were limits, and that's how the law was originally envisioned.
So here I am. Here I am on my. I have for my sins, I'm on Facebook, right? Which I don't know how long I'll do it. But there I am on Facebook because somebody encouraged me and said it was a good idea. I have people, they want to be my friends. Maybe I should check into it more, but I don't really, and I check off yes. So I checked off one person about a year ago who turns out, I find out, starts making declarations. They live in Tunisia and they're making declarations of violence against various governmental institutions. But they're my friend. Right? So now I find out that I could be included in this kind of overall surveillance. So basically what happened, what Mr. Snowden revealed here was that the NSA, for years now, with the approval of these FISA courts, they rejected what was, I think, 11 applications out of 39,000 in the last several years.
It's a very small number, very small number.
Okay, so they go there, the NSA, the FBI, whoever goes there, and they say, we want this order, we want this warrant, whatever, and they grant almost every single last one of them. It turns out they've thrown a net over the entire country. Every phone call in this country, theoretically, according to what we were learning here, is logged. It's not tapped, and they don't have the actual words of the phone calls, but they're logged. They know who everybody is talking to all the time, and now we're finding out, although the companies deny it, and maybe you could shed some light on this, that these large companies like Facebook and Yahoo and all these companies have been cooperating. They say. One of them, I think, said, we had to do it. Verizon, we had to do it because we were ordered to do it, but none of them seem to have fought back very much.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but
yeah, go ahead.
First of all, in terms of what the NSA is actually doing, your characterization is correct. It appears to be that what they're doing is, with respect to they're kind of two separate things that Snowden revealed, and the first is the logging of phone records, mm-hmm. and what was leaked was an order directed to Verizon, although news reports have indicated that there are similar orders at other big telecoms, and that is correct. It's capturing a record of every phone call that's being made in the United States, essentially. Mm-hmm. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is this program that's called PRISM, which is an attempt to obtain Internet communications like emails and photos that are being spread around the web. And what the companies have said is that they did not knowingly engage in this program. And it appears to be, there's still a lot of uncertainty about it, but it appears to be that what they're trying to say is they're refuting some of the early news reports that said, that the NSA essentially could tap into the servers of the companies directly. All the companies have basically said that's not true. Mm-hmm. And what it appears to be is that while the PRISM, there's a PowerPoint presentation that was leaked, and that PowerPoint presentation seems to suggest that that's what the program did. What people are now speculating is that the program didn't actually do that, but rather what it did was it created a system wherein the companies would basically funnel to the NSA all of that stuff going through their servers, and then the NSA would have almost like a copy of that mm-hmm. information, and then could use this PRISM program to sift through and search through all of this web traffic and Facebook posts and Gmail messages, etc.
So to the extent that they're admitting anything, they are saying that they will allow that they were forced to do it and they had no choice, right?
Yes, and the New York Times, I think on either Thursday or Friday, ran a story that basically said that Yahoo in 2008 actually filed a legal challenge to this kind of collection, and that they lost. And once they lost, they agreed to participate in the program. And the sense is that I think the other companies, once they saw that Yahoo lost the legal challenge, they decided, well, there's no point in raising a legal challenge because we were going to raise the same challenge that Yahoo raised, and we're going to lose, and that's the end of it. And that was a challenge raised in the FISC, in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
Well, now there's two things with this that occur to me immediately. One is all this is happening in secret, which is not the way we hoped our laws would work. And two, I don't know what the nature of this challenge was, but it seemed to have stopped pretty clearly short of where they could have all joined together, perhaps, and taken it all the way up to the top, right?
Well, in terms of the legal challenge, quite frankly, we don't know a whole lot about it. We haven't seen the pleadings. So, I mean, in terms of the strategy behind it, maybe there was other ways to challenge it. Maybe they felt it was pointless. But I think to your first point, that really shows that's the real problem here. The secrecy of it is not only are these applications being done in secret, which is understandable to a certain extent, but the problem is that the court's opinions, the FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court's opinions, are kept secret, and how it interprets the law, which is what's contained in the opinions, are kept secret, so that we don't even have an understanding of how these specific statutes in FISA are being interpreted by the courts, and we don't have a real way of knowing what limits are actually in effect under these programs and under the law.
You know what disturbs me, and maybe you could tell me whether or not you think this is right or wrong, that and maybe I've gotten it wrong, is that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appoints the FISA judges?
I'm not entirely sure. The FISA court is a panel of either 9 or 11. I can't remember.
It's 9 judges.
But it's a number of judges, and they're appointed. For many years, it was kind of kept under wraps who was on the court, although we now know some of the members of that
Well,
court.
we know Mr. Vinson's on the court.
We know Mr. Vinson's on the court, and Reggie Walton is also on that court, and those are D.C. Area judges. And, but other than that, their operations are largely in secret. There's a very comprehensive federal court docketing system where you can pull records in federal court cases, but, for the FISC, they have none of that. They're not even listed on the U.S. court's website. I mean, it's almost as if this is like a secret court that operates in secret and interprets the law secretly, and its opinions remain secretly. And I think you're absolutely right. That's not the system of democracy we've established in this country.
So what the NSA has apparently done, and they don't seem to be denying it or anything like that, they're getting very angry about it, and they're blaming, the person who's basically revealing all of this as a traitor, whatever. Let me ask you a straightforward question here. Is what the NSA is doing, if they are doing what Mr. Snowden said they were doing, and they don't seem to be doing, is that unconstitutional? Is that against the Constitution of the United States, the Fourth Amendment?
I think it is. We think it is, definitely. And there are many reasons why. And I won't bore you to death with going through all of them.
Well, a couple of them is all right.
But I think the big one is the whole point of the Fourth Amendment was to prohibit the general warrant. And the general warrant, it was basically these warrants that were issued during colonial times, where the British soldiers and officers would have these general warrants where they would authorize them to enter into a house, but then basically search whatever they wanted for anything they wanted.
And also seize anything they wanted too, right?
Exactly. Okay. And they used this as a way to really, stifle political dissent during a very tumultuous time in the colonies. And when the framers passed the Fourth Amendment, what they did was they specifically eliminated this general warrant. And the way they did that was they first said that warrants had to be supported by probable cause. Mm-hmm. Second, they had to be individualized or particularized, meaning they had to specifically say who they wanted to search and why, or where they wanted to search and why. And when the judge received the application, the judge had to ensure that the request was particular and had the authority to make it even more particular, put limitations or restrictions on how the government can act out the search. Mm-hmm. The problem with this type of data collection is it's a general warrant. If you're collecting the log of every single phone record that is made in the United States, that is a general warrant. Now, the flip side of that is the government says, well, none of this stuff is protected by the Fourth Amendment. That's been their argument in domestic courts, and that's why they can get, so they say, is why they can get this information without having to get a search warrant, because the argument is, well, these are records that belong to Verizon, and you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the records that belong to Verizon. And they also say, look, it's just metadata. It doesn't, we're not capturing the actual contents of the phone call.
Well, to me, that's easily dismissed. It's the first one that concerns me.
Well, I think both of them are easily dismissed, and I think that it's just metadata. It doesn't matter. Is I think a false logic. I mean, it matters, which is why they want to collect it in the first place, and it matters because it can reveal a great deal of information about us. And going to the kind of the first point, which is that it's Verizon's records, it's not our records. The Fourth Amendment is concerned with whether people have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and I think people reasonably expect that that this data, even if it's not the content of the phone call, that's not just going to be revealed to anybody, anywhere, at any time. I don't expect you to have my billing records or for you to know every single phone call I make. We shouldn't be any different when it comes to interacting with the government.
Well, how do you square that with what Facebook, did? They made a big deal about it. We're telling you we're going to do this, so you have the right to basically do nothing. But they let you know in advance that from now on, and of course, everybody's familiar with this now. Google, for instance, they told everybody, 6 months, a year ago, that from now on, they're going to track everything you do. This is a private company. And, what's going to turn up? You could go look to buy a lawnmower, and what's going to turn up is Viagra pills, right? In other words, they're tracking you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's legal, too. That's legal for them to do, right?
Well, I think there's a couple things. The first is that, at least when it comes to phone call data, the Supreme Court in the 70s, Justice Marshall wrote in a dissenting opinion that a phone is an essential necessity in today's day and life. And this was in 1979. I think that today being connected to the internet is becoming an essential necessity in life. Now, it's true you don't necessarily need a Facebook account, and you could live without one, and some people are happy doing that. I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, I think that there's an issue when these companies do their best to attract as many people as possible to come use their services. They should be very careful with what they do with the data that they're generating. And, of course, the key issue is always about consent. If you're informing your customers in a meaningful way and giving them the option to exercise their preferences in a meaningful way, then yes, I agree. It's hard to complain when things happen the way that they've already warned you are going to happen. But but that doesn't mean that A, it's all or nothing, and B, it doesn't mean that it's B, I think the issue is the most important point is that the companies have to be absolutely crystal clear with what they're doing. And that's not always the case. Or they'll set the defaults to be the least privacy restrictive because that's in their best interest. And then people who aren't maybe not as sophisticated or aren't keeping up with these things don't realize that that something has changed. And as a result, all this information.
Well, the fact that businesses are dishonest or shifty, there is nothing more ancient than that. I mean, that goes back as far as cave drawings. I mean, the Romans had on their marketplace caveat emptor. You're going to go out in the world and buy something, a service or a product. Good luck, right? That's your problem. If you're not deliberately poisoned or absolutely lied to, that's where you want the government to step in. But back to the NSA, if they throw a net over every communication, every email, every phone call in the United States, what is the redress that people can have against this thing? Who do we sue? Where do we go to reverse this kind of behavior? How do we do this?
Well, I think in terms of suing, it's got to be the government. Unfortunately, part of the law that came about as a result of the warrantless wiretapping scandal was that Congress passed retroactive immunity to all of the big major providers for complying with these types of orders. So you're not going to have much luck suing the companies. But you can obviously sue the government. You could sue the NSA, and already lawsuits are starting to come in. The ACLU filed a lawsuit about this very thing, and so I imagine that there will be more to come.
What about your group? Are you going to join in that, or?
We're still figuring out our options, and but again, I mean, if not us, there's going to be other organizations that are going to be doing it. So, I mean, lawsuit is one way to go. But in terms of the ultimate redress, we need to have Congress re-examine what's going on, what's being approved. They need to be given forthright answers about how the court works, what the government is collecting, what they're doing with the data. We've called for, a church committee for 2013, to kind of have a similar type of oversight and a re-examination of what's going on. And at the same time, we need to see the rules surrounding the secrecy of FISC and FISC opinions opened up so that we can understand how this court is interpreting the law that affects all of us.
So basically what we're doing, you're suggesting that we have to count on, or we have to hope for, Congress to represent the people of the United States in this issue.
Well, I think that's the way functionally we can get the changes. Now, of course, hey, look, I can be a cynic, and I can understand that I don't have a whole ton of faith that Congress will get things right or that they'll care enough to make changes. But I think the fact that there's a lot of outcry about this and that it's not dying down is a good sign and a good push in the right direction. And I think we need to get Congress's attention on this and get them understanding that this is not something that's going to go away, that this is something that's extremely important and that needs to be dealt with in an appropriate fashion, and that the NSA's powers need to be reined in.
Well, I guess you have to hope that what we're seeing so far is that the committees in the Senate and the House that are overseeing this kind of behavior and have for a long time have gone trotting along with it like little trained poodles, and the couple of people who objected to it said that they couldn't tell you why they objected to it because of secrecy. So I don't know.
Senator Wyden of Oregon and Senator Udall of Colorado have for many years now been very vocal and outspoken about how that if the American public understood what was going on in these programs, they'd be very upset. And I think
So now they know. So now we do know.
Well, now we do know, exactly. And as predicted, a lot of people are very upset. And I think as more information comes to light, I think more people will be upset, and hopefully that'll get Congress's attention and spur them to convene a committee to examine, to consider updates to the law, and to consider opening up FISC opinions so that we can understand how the law is being interpreted.
Let me ask you one last question, which is a little trivial, and this is you're listening to Hani Fakouri, who is a staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. What's the website?
EFF.org.
Okay, and it's a very valuable place, so you should check in with this place. I go online and I see a copy. Glenn Greenwald, reveals these documents, right? I see a copy of the order that I guess it was an order that Judge Vinson issued, right? That he signed, and I read that. It's a top secret document, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When I read that, do I have any liability?
Oh, that's a good question I haven't really thought of. I mean, you're not supposed to possess classified documents, and you certainly can't leak them. But I think if you're just viewing it on the website, you're not really possessing the document. If you save it, you're possessing it. Now, the question is, if this document's been seen by hundreds of millions of people, is there any chance that the government is likely going to come after you? I think
no, I think not. But I was just interested, sort of almost like an intellectual point. In other words, I'm looking at a top secret document. I don't have clearance for that.
No, and neither do I. And that's an interesting thought. But I'm hopeful that the government will hopefully realize they've got bigger fish to fry.
Well, all right. Thanks for coming on. And obviously, this is a story which is unfolding every single day. We don't even know what's left out there to be revealed. We'll find out.
We will. But thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to come on anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that's it. We're going to take a break. And we talked about a lot of important stuff this week, this last couple of hours. And now it's your turn. After we come back from the break, I expect a tsunami. Am I saying that right? A tidal wave of phone calls from the listeners. And let's get some commentary from people. You all listen to this. You all live in the country. Got your phones logged. Got your phones tapped, probably. Got your emails tapped. Does that bother you at all? One of the big questions is a lot of people are saying, I'm willing to trade in my privacy to be secure. Really? That much? Really? What's the point after a while? How much do you want to trade in before there's nothing left to trade at all? I mean, if we're protecting democracy to the point where there is no democracy, what's the point of all this? Anyhow, we're going to take a break, and what we'll do is take your calls. You can call in during the break, and we can line you up. We already got a couple of people calling. Join those people, and we'll be with you right after the break. We'll go straight to the calls. Mr. Breaker, you want to break? Okay, we're back. We have phone calls, but first, let me mention that if you want to get in touch with me and you want to express an opinion about something you heard here, or get more titles of different books, if you want to find out more about my book, if you want to talk about some issue, anything you want to do, you want to contact me, You just go to Feder Files, Feder. Yes, that's it. I'm remembering my name, even though I'm old now. It's my birthday tomorrow, you know. I'm an old guy, so I forget things. FederFiles.com. Feder Files, FederFiles.com. You can contact me that way. Also, you can get on my mailing list. And also, you can get on the NSA's spy list. They're listening to everything that happens, right? So that's it. Who do we have? Anthony from Long Island. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? Happy birthday.
Yeah, well, thanks.
There you welcome. Two quick things. First is, and they're connected, I was very involved with Occupy Wall Street, and I still do a lot of work with them. We have not fizzled. The media has stopped paying attention. And I know you've talked about this, but the removal from the park in November of 2011 was a violent act of a police state. And, to blame a movement for having been forcibly removed from somewhere and then say they went away is laughable. And the media did that, and it fit their narrative. Secondly, they don't cover anything else that happens. For instance, the past 3 weekends in Zuccotti Park, there's been a presence. There have been thousands of people there. Nothing on any media station. It doesn't matter. It's still going on. Just because people aren't sleeping there, that was a tactic. That's to me inconsequential. The idea is that we're addressing income inequality, and that caller, I don't know if he's been involved in any protest. It didn't sound like it. For him to sit there and critique it without having been part of it, basically plays into the narrative of the media, which is it went away, and without talking about the brutality. I mean, I saw cops smash laptops with baseball bats. This is what happened. And they closed the Brooklyn Bridge that night. They wouldn't let CBS's news copter fly above Zuccotti when it was being evicted. So that lays the groundwork for the next point I'm going to make, was that when public discourse becomes protest and it addresses systemic change, such as corporate capitalism isn't working, that's why we're occupying Wall Street, it is met with sheer brutality. They are so frightened that people will catch on and rise up against a system that only benefits a few people. That's why they're tapping our phones. There was an article that I read recently, I can't remember where it was, that said anybody who attended any Occupy Wall Street event if their phone was on and their battery was in their phone was logged in.
Oh, yeah, I read that article, too. Yeah.
I don't care.
Well, also, we now know, just to add to what you're saying, we now know from FOIA requests that were made to the FBI that FBI, surveillance people and people at central headquarters of the FBI in these fusion centers, they consider the Occupy movement terrorists.
Yeah.
They actually use those words. So in other words, in America now, if you protest the government, which is your absolute right and duty as an American, you are now a terrorist.
And duty, and I agree. Listen, I'm a white man in my 40s. I'm a social worker and an adjunct professor at an accredited university. I'm middle class, but I think I don't think we have the luxury of time to ignore what's going on right now with wealth nationally and globally, and addressing it scared them. So I do not believe for a minute that the NSA program exists because of foreign terrorists. I think it has to do with domestic surveillance and movements just such as mine.
I think you're absolutely right. They saw what happened in the Arab Spring. They saw the Occupy movement. They're scared to death, and that's why they're spying on all of us. And you're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought that up. It's much more about what's going on in this country than what's happening in other countries.
One question.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
I wish I could have gotten this to your guest. I had read somewhere, and I don't know what the specifics were, that the beginnings of the NSA program, which originally was called Stellar Wind, right, before all this, that the Bush administration had put things into place 6 months prior to 9/11. So I don't know. And I know that Clinton's Telecommunications Act in the mid to late 90s laid the groundwork for it as well. This stuff was this is not conspiracy theory. This stuff is in the works before 9/11 ever happened.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and obviously,
I mean, the National Security Administration was born during the Red Scare in 1952. So it's all about, as you put it clearly, and it's always been about in this country, the greatest brutality and the greatest tearing up of the Constitution as far as our rights go, whenever there was a mass movement or a threatened mass movement in this country against the government behavior. It's always been that way. In the Palmer raids, all this, Hoover, the formation of the FBI, they were tapping foes along. As long as there's been foes, they've been tapping them,
And just to use the platform, because I have it for a second here, but for anybody who's listening, I was, I continue to be very involved in this, in addressing income inequality through Occupy Wall Street. I have never ever seen a protester engage in an act of violence.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen police do it many times.
Well, like I say, this is every time we have these kinds of conversations or a guest comes on here, and now I'm having it again with you, the light bulb goes on, and it clearly reveals a document to me, which is we, the people of the United States, we are no longer represented by a government that is interested in our interests, but are opposing our interests. We have to figure out what to do about it. People knew what to do in 1776. What do we do now?
Agreed.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Anthony.
Fighting, man.
Okay. What do we have? Daryl, you're on, Daryl.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, I find that, listening to the last caller, he opines that the media isn't covering what's going on in Ducati Park. Well, that's because the media is blowing up with this NSA story. I mean, the media has such a short attention span, and it's only good these days at covering one big story at a time. And so, unless a bomb goes off in Central Park, they're not going to move off this NSA story until it no longer has any legs, no longer gets any eyeballs, etc. So, I mean, that is a fact of life. That is the 24-hour spin cycle that we are in, unfortunately. And that's the way it's going to be unless something major changes in this country.
Well, do you remember what Johnson said about Gerald Ford, that he couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time? This is basically the media. That's the media, I mean, they have tens of thousands of employees in one place or another. You'd think they might be able to cover a few stories at the same time.
No, I mean, remember when Natalie Holloway disappeared?
Mm.
You would have thought that, that Jesus had appeared somewhere. The media was just on that story.
Oh, did we lose that call? I think, Daryl, you got snatched out of the air by the NSA or God or bad communications. But call us back. Who do we have next? Matt from Michigan, you're on.
Yeah, good evening, Mike. Great show. First of all, I agree with the first caller that lost my train of thought.
Oh, Anthony, he was talking about Occupy. The NSA spying program and the crackdown on Occupy, how vicious it was for how peaceful the demonstrations were, particularly in Oakland, is really a measure of the desperation of the state. They know more than anyone how tenuous every institution is and their own position is, really. I mean, there are millions of us if we were organized. And I think that's, it's easy to get discouraged and think it's just an overwhelming force. But I think that the reaction you see from this state is really a measure of this is not the actions of a state that feels secure in its position. They don't spy on everybody if they feel secure. I mean, this is the kind of situation you had with the East Germany or the Soviet Union when they started to fall apart. All throughout history, every time you ever see a state that knows that it's doing wrong, and maybe some part of what remains of their morality, they still suspect that something they're doing is very wrong, and they know that people object to it, and they know that if they gave them a chance, they'd overthrow them. That's when they react the way our government's reacting now, and you're absolutely right to point that out. Yeah, I think that's where we're at. What I actually was calling about, though, is your guest mentioned very briefly the story about Ecuador. Mm-hmm. I was doing my daily reading of Al Jazeera, and that story immediately caught my attention because, and I have conflicting opinions about it. First of all, I've only read one article, and I want to do a little more homework about it. But the situation in this country, there's like 6 corporations that own over 90% of the media. Mm-hmm. Now, I suspect
in most Latin American countries, this was certainly the case in Venezuela, the corporate ownership is actually stronger and more powerful than it even is in this country.
Mm.
And so I don't know what happened there was Rafael Correa, with overwhelming support of the assembly, they decided this thing was going to take over, I think, a third of the media, which still leaves, 3/4 of the media for private ownership. But I don't know how you get a counterbalancing power. I mean, in this country, despite, how Democrats have so much affection for MSNBC, you're getting a corporate slant on everything if you don't go to outside sources. And I think it's probably a more dominant corporate view if you rely on the private sector for news in Ecuador or most South American countries. So I don't know where you're going to get a balancing force outside of taking that action. Now, I have to say right off the bat, I intuitively, reject the idea or are very, skeptical, suspicious of a state taking over the media or putting rules on how much private ownership you can have. But I just don't see in this day and age, you got these massive corporations. Many of them, these corporations actually have, budgets or profits that are greater than the GNP of some of these countries. And it wouldn't surprise me if, like Exxon, the GNP is bigger than Ecuador.
This kind of thing.
How do you fight that?
This kind of thing is happening all over the world. In Greece, the government of Greece, pretending that it was for austerity purposes, just disbanded their version of the BBC. Right? They just disbanded.
I saw that.
They just disbanded it, and they're going to reform it with 1/10 of the people and put the people in that they want to tell the news that they want people to hear. It's extraordinary what is happening all over the place. We are at the point of revolution in many countries in the world, and it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, in Vietnam, which is a dictatorship, they just locked up a guy who's a blogger who criticized the government. In Myanmar, you can go to jail for 20 years if you insult the emperor or the king or whatever the fuck he is. 20 years in jail if you insult the king. This is going on all over the place. Now we see it. We see it in our own country, and no longer do Americans have, people in the government, like these senators or the president. For instance, here's something that fascinates me about Bradley Manning. One of the things that Snowden revealed was that for the last 10 years, the United States has been hacking into Chinese government computers, which amuses me no end because the president of the United States, first of all, everybody knows that the Chinese government is hacking into American computers, and editorial pages and senators and the president has been condemning this outrageous behavior. At the same time, we've been doing this, and they all know we've been doing it for at least 10 years. So the more this guy reveals, the more I think it's a great public service that he's doing for all of us.
Yeah, well, Noam Chomsky's constant theme is that we never look in the mirror, basically, for anything. In this case of yelling about the Chinese government, the horrible Chinese government hacking into our spying, it's just another example of how there's never any self-examination. And at the very least, I got to hope from Snowden's report there will be a little self-examination on the part of the American public.
Well, self-examination is for Buddhists and neurotics. A real American never does that. We're going to have to, we really have to move on. We have to take another.
All right. Have a good weekend, Mike.
Yeah, you too. Who do we have? Chuck from Illinois. Chuck, you're on.
How you doing? Happy Bloomsday.
Hey, yeah, thanks a lot. Tomorrow is Bloomsday for anybody who's never read.
It's today. I'm sorry.
No, it's tomorrow. June 16th is Bloomsday, which means actually in this extraordinary novel, one of the best novels ever written, perhaps the best novel ever written in the English language, called Ulysses by James Joyce. It all the action in this novel, which is massive, like 900 pages, takes place on June 16th. And it is called Bloomsday because one of the lead characters in the book is Leopold Bloom, and that happens to be my birthday. So every year, this novel, which I have read and which I love, I identify with this, all of which is to no point whatsoever. Go ahead.
I wanted to second what your one caller said about people being more interested in football and sports and whatever distraction they can come up with, and not really knowing the history of our country and what's going on now. And to plug one book by a guy named William F. Pepper is called An Act of State, the Execution of Martin Luther King, where he was the lawyer for the King family, and he won a civil suit for them that the jury agreed that it was a conspiracy by the Memphis police, the U.S. military, special forces, the CIA, and FBI.
What's the book again?
It's an act called An Act of State.
Okay.
By William F. Act of State, the execution of Martin Luther King by William F. Pepper, who was the lawyer for the King family.
Okay.
And the King family, everybody thinks they're so greedy, but all they wanted to do was the truth to come out, and they settled for $100 in civil damages. And I'm kind of glad that they protect the King legacy, because otherwise they'd be using it in Pepsi commercials probably by now.
Oh, they'll be dead. So wait till next week. You'll see it. All right. Thanks.
Well, have a happy birthday.
Thanks a lot.
Okay,
who do we have? Bob in Tennessee. You're on, Bob.
Well, happy birthday, too.
Oh, thanks. How did you find out? How did you find out?
A little bird told me.
Yeah, that's me, a little bird. Go ahead.
You might remember back in the 1950s, they had a television program called I've Got a Secret.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, today we have a new program. It's called They've Got a Secret.
Yeah.
Secret applications to a secret court who holds secret deliberations, issues secret rulings, grants secret warrants to secret agents. Secrecy is a necessary aspect of tyranny.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and everybody, and the opposite has been pointed out by legal scholars, justices, writers, and famous orators throughout history, which is you can only have a democracy in an open society. Where you have secrecy, you have tyranny. Where you have openness, you can have democracy. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
That's why I like your show, Mike.
Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks for calling. And I guess we could take, who do we have? Sam from New Hampshire. You're on, Sam.
Hi. I wanted to make a couple of quick observations about what's been in the news. I don't really have a problem with the Feds listening to my phone calls if they would just chip in on the bill. And as far as Obama getting a Nobel Peace Prize, a week after he ramped up the war in Afghanistan, I think that perhaps he got the prize because the rest of the world was so collectively relieved to have a president, an American president, that could form complete sentences. I'll take your comments off the air.
Those are rhetorical comments. They already said what they had to say. Thank you. Let's take one more call. Mr. Kendall, you're on, Kendall.
Hello. Yeah, I was sitting here thinking maybe they didn't go far enough with all of this. I believe in Nigeria, the U.S. government and MasterCard are helping Nigeria to go cashless. Maybe if they chipped all of us and they could track us all the time, it would eliminate all the crime and just think all the social ills it could cure.
I'm not really...
You put all the financial transactions on this chip, you wouldn't be able to buy any food that wasn't approved by the government in an approved amount. You could eliminate alcoholism. You could eliminate all crime. Maybe the government hasn't gone far enough.
Let me ask you. So what do you think about the NSA spying? Do you mind it? Do you oppose it? What's your position on it?
Does it really matter what my opinion is? I mean,
Well, you called up, didn't you? You called the radio. Go ahead. Tell me what you think.
I think it's disgusting as hell. I think we're losing our country.
Well, I think probably most people would agree with you. The trouble is that most people don't.
I think it's going to get much worse. I think that chipping thing, that is the future. I mean, you go to Europe and you can buy a soda out of a vending machine just by swiping your cell phone in front of it. The thing in Nigeria, that's real. They're going credit cards. And all the technology I talked about already exists. I mean, we're putting chips in our dogs for, 15, 20 years now. Sooner or later, they're going to do that, and they're going to be able to track us wherever we go.
You know, I'm in a funny position. I think I agree with you generally. I'm in a funny position of not having to worry about any of this because I've been on the radio telling everybody everything about my life and every political opinion I have out loud to thousands of people for 35 years. So I am in an opposition of not being concerned about this at all. They already know everything I have to say. I think that regular American citizens who have some privacy, which I gave away by going on the air, should be appalled and concerned to the point where they need to take some kind of action. And I'm not sure voting is really,
How I sold it is how they're going to sell it. I mean, it would eliminate all crime. It would eliminate obesity. It would eliminate alcoholism. They'd be able to control everything we do. And there's a huge portion of society that's more than willing to give that all up just so they have somebody else take control of their lives.